Chapter 709. Angel Holy War. Eagle King had never heard of this organization. He didn't even have a similar name. He had heard of Saint War Angel. She was the strongest combat force of the Vatican, but now it had become a thing of the past. Saint War Angel Arcis of the Vatican was killed by tribulation in the state of coronation and died in Mormons. Now the Vatican, which had been badly injured, had no invincible realm experts. Naturally, the name of Saint War Angel had become nothingness. What about Saint War Angel? Eagle King looked at him carefully. He was sure of one thing again. He didn't know him and had never heard of Saint War Angel. Eagle King turned his head slightly and looked at Ning Qianxing. He was a senior in the Li family, but in Emperor Dong's palace, Ning Qianxing was the real senior. Moreover, he had been staying in the Li family all these years and hadn't been active outside. Maybe Saint War Angel was a force that had emerged in recent years. Maybe Ning Qianxing had heard of it. Eagle King knew his position very well. No matter where the other party came from, the decision at the moment needed to be made by Ning Qianxing. Eagle King was only responsible for the command of this operation. I've never heard of Saint War Angel either. Ning Qianxing walked over and shook his head. He looked at number one and asked directly, "Why are you helping us?" "I'm just following orders," number one said with a smile. He was skinny and had dark skin, and he had obvious Anan characteristics. However, he was extremely fluent in Chinese, and his pronunciation was perfect. Following orders? Ning Qianxing raised his eyebrows. Whose orders? He subconsciously glanced at the three informants that had landed on the ground. The superalloy body of the informant shone with an almost transparent silver radiance under the sunlight, like a steel monster crawling in the light. Most of the paratroopers stood quietly near the informant, motionless, in a tight formation, with an indescribable toughness and iron will. A few paratroopers walked up to the informant and began to check its weapons. After confirming that there were no malfunctions, a large airdrop was pushed over, and more than 10 paratroopers began to load ammunition into the informant in silence. Ning Qianxing's mouth twitched. At this moment, he keenly noticed the mental state of the other party. Every troop had its own mental state or morale. Different troops, different battles, and different endings would have different mental states. The paratroopers in front of him were undoubtedly elites. If the first batch of paratroopers who stormed the base were just a group of fearless cannon fodder, then the paratroopers who entered the base last were the true elites who had been through hundreds of battles. However, their labels were not the silent and fierce ones of the regular elites, but a kind of fanaticism. It was a fanaticism that bordered on insanity. This fanaticism was expressed in everyone's eyes and made all the paratroopers look like they had an unshakable determination. He took a deep breath, looked at number one, and asked again, "Whose order?" Number one was in a difficult position. He spread his hands and didn't know what to say. After a long time, he smiled bitterly. He said softly, "That's not important. The important thing is that from today on, we will only follow the orders of His Highness Li Tianlan. 10 concealers, 4 empty city transport planes, an armed satellite, and more than 2,000 paratroopers would all belong to His Highness Li Tianlan from now on. Lord Ning Qianxing, in other words, we are now on the same side. We need Emperor Dong's palace's trust." But Ning Qianxing suppressed his inner shock and asked. Apart from everything else, the cost of 10 concealers was nearly $1 billion, not the selling price. The cost of the empty city transport planes was even more expensive than the concealers. As for the armed satellite, it was AF** King armed satellite, not an ordinary satellite. For Emperor Dong's palace, the value of the armed satellite was immeasurable. More than 2,000 elite paratroopers were also what Emperor Dong's palace needed. In other words, if these people could really be trusted, once they joined Emperor Dong's palace, the strength of Emperor Dong's palace would increase exponentially. After a short period of digesting, the overall strength of Emperor Dong's palace would even exceed the strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan and become the third largest force in Tiannan after the Freedom Corps and the Rebel Army. Number one opened his mouth and was about to say something, but his body suddenly stiffened and he said respectfully, "Your Highness." Eagle King and Ning Qianxing looked at each other in astonishment. Number 1 looked serious and nodded. He took off the communicator from his ear and handed it to Ning Qianxing. He said softly, "His Highness Li Tunlan wants to talk to you." The war broke out in Tunan City and was about to come to an end. In Tunan City, it was swift, efficient, thunderous, and even destructive. No words could describe the efficiency of this war. 12 minutes after Li Tianlan entered Tunan City, the lurkers joined the battlefield. 15 minutes after Li Tianlan entered Tunan City, the Burning Legion completely lost contact with the 3 military bases near Tunan City. Nearly 10,000 elites of the Burning Legion and nearly 20,000 rebels in the city were completely exposed to the firepower of the 3 lurkers. Gunfire roared in the air. Killing swept across the city. The 3 lurkers that occupied the air played an irreplaceable role in a battlefield of this scale. The surging bullets divided the entire battlefield in the shortest time possible. The elites of the Burning Legion were no longer able to support Ramelin. The ruins of the Tunan City Hall had completely become a one-on-one battlefield for Li Tianlan and Ramelin. The killing went on. So did the fighting. With the City Hall as the center, everything within a kilometer around it had been completely destroyed. Roads were cracked, buildings collapsed, vehicles exploded, and trees were crooked. This was originally the most prosperous area of Tunan City, but at this moment, it was as tragic as a garbage dump. Both Li Tianlan and Ramelin were madly venting their power. There was no sword energy or sword light. There was only power. Since entering the secular world, Li Tianlan had never been so crazy. His dual wind and thunder veins had been stretched to the extreme. Dragon Fist, Nocturnal Walking Skill, Hurricane Kick, and all the unique skills of the Li family were constantly blooming in his hands. While the lurker was creating the killing storm, Li Tianlan was suppressing Ramelin. Yes, it was suppression. This was what frightened Ramelin the most. 3 years ago, when the force of the Dark World was at its peak, he was the second on the holy list. Today, even if those invincible realm experts who died or were seriously injured in Eastern Europe were counted, his strength should be enough to enter the bottom of the divine list. But now, facing Li Tianlan, he was completely suppressed. Storm-like attack. Ramelin was surrounded by attacks. At this point, the only thing he could do was to defend. In the almost violent attack, he didn't even have a chance to breathe. This seemed to be the first time that Li Tianlan completely suppressed an invincible realm expert with his own strength. The most important thing was that Li Tianlan hadn't entered the invincible realm yet. What would happen once he broke through that threshold? If he just entered the invincible realm, would his combat capability be barely comparable to that of an expert at the peak of the invincible realm? If he stabilized the invincible realm, would he be evenly matched with an expert at the peak of the invincible realm? When he really reached the peak of the invincible realm, who could be his opponent? Such a terrible possibility was no longer a possibility, but was becoming a fact. In recent decades, only Wang Tianzong seemed to have achieved this kind of terrible, scalp-numbing fact. It was not too much to call him the future chosen one. Now, Li Tianlan, who was only 22 years old, was constantly showing his strength to the whole Dark World. Retreat. While retreating helplessly, he ferociously swept his leg and smashed it directly. The shadow of the leg appeared all over the sky in an instant and turned into a storm in an instant. The fierce sound of the wind lifted the dust and gravel nearby. In the obstacles that almost blocked out the sky and the sun, Li Tianlan's every movement had a clear shadow. A kick full of great power landed on Ramelin's chest. With a dull sound, Ramelin's body was knocked into the ruins. Dense cracks appeared on the collapsed wall. The moment the cracks appeared, the whole storm suddenly swept over. With a loud roar, the huge ruins suddenly flew up. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air, and the shining lightning turned into the shadow of a dragon all over the sky, directly surrounding Ramelin in the flying ruins. The dragon's roar shook the sky, and the dull sound of fists hitting flesh reverberated. In the blink of an eye, a large area of ruins was completely blown up. Ramelin's figure was blasted into the air. Before his blood could fall to the ground, Li Tianlan had already grabbed his ankle and smashed him to the ground. The moment his head was raised, Li Tianlan's hard knee hit his nose. As blood flowed wildly, Li Tianlan, who was almost crazy, pounced on him again. Ramelun couldn't imagine how a person could move so fast. This kind of attack frequency that exceeded the limits of the human body didn't even slow down his attack power. His defense was getting more and more strained, and there were more and more loopholes. As he was constantly suppressed, he was getting closer and closer to complete failure. This was no longer a battle. It could even be said to be a naked beating. Li Tianlan's punches and kicks were completely bursting out with a kind of power that wanted to kill him alive. All the unique skills became mere appearances. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to have completely given up all the skills, and his whole body exuded an unimaginable fierceness. He made big moves and destroyed everything with absolute attacks. He was domineering, straightforward, crazy, and unreasonable. This was a kind of violence that had been brought to the extreme. It was simple but invincible. Ramelun was still holding on with all his might. He could fail, but the Burning Legion couldn't. The elites of the Burning Legion and the rebel army were looking for cover all over the city to avoid being chased by the Hidden Ones. They were also looking for opportunities to fight back. Ramelun's communication with the three bases had been completely cut off. But at this time, the cut-off communication became his greatest hope. When he didn't know the specific situation of the three bases, he thought again and again about how powerful the three bases were and how destructive they could be. As long as the elites of the three bases killed the enemy, the Hidden Ones would be out of their invisible state. Once they killed the Hidden Ones, victory would still belong to the Burning Legion. However, Ramelun had changed his mind. As long as there was no threat from the Hidden Ones, he would order all the Burning Legion and the rebel army to besiege Li Tianlan. Could he kill people? Then let him kill them. Even if Li Tianlan was an immortal, he couldn't kill tens of thousands of people. As long as he could kill Li Tianlan, Ramelun would think it was worth it, no matter how heavy the price was. Moreover, his Burning Legion had been trained for many years and had experienced many wars. They were as good as the world-famous Thunderbolt Battalion of Zhongzhou State. Even if they couldn't stop Li Tianlan, they could still cause him enough trouble. So in the face of the terrible situation, Ramelun gritted his teeth and did everything he could to hold on. After all, he was an invincible realm expert. Even if he was no match for Li Tianlan couldn't kill him in a short time if he wanted to. In the current situation, it was a competition of who could hold on longer. Ramelun's wait finally paid off. But it didn't come from the base. A large number of airborne troops suddenly appeared in Tunan City and began to attack the formation of the Burning Legion. The cannon fodder attracted the firepower, and the real elites entered the field later. The battlefield completely spread to the whole Tunan City. There were fights everywhere. The enemies hiding in the dark couldn't be killed for the time being, but with the support of the firepower on the ground, the whole battle was on the verge of collapse. The war lasted for 45 minutes. Ramelun finally received the fire support from the military base. It was support for Li Tianlan. The artillery fire all over the sky didn't hit the hidden people at all. It all fell into the formation of the Burning Legion and the rebel army. The number of the Burning Legion and the rebel army was getting smaller and smaller, and the formation began to become obviously sparse. Although the direction of the fire support seemed to come from the third base, which had the weakest firepower, the third base's firepower was enough to completely break the already unbalanced balance. Before the surprise rose in his heart, despair had already made Ramelun's heart sink to the bottom. At this moment, he gradually couldn't support Li Tianlan's offensive, and the Burning Legion and the rebel army couldn't fight anymore. The situation was hopeless. It wasn't until this moment that he finally realized it. The failure of the three military bases made him completely lose the basis for turning defeat into victory. Ramelun's eyes were blood-red. Covered in blood, he looked like a beast struggling for its life. 3 years of secret preparation. More than a month of emergency deployment. The Burning Legion sneaked into Tiannan in batches, bringing the most elite forces and a large number of experts. It was certain that the Burning Legion would become a superpower, but their plan had just begun. Before they had time to enjoy the joy of victory, failure was already at hand. The elites of the Burning Legion suffered heavy losses. The rebel army suffered heavy losses. He had no foundation in Tianan, and he had lost to Li Tianlan. In such a situation, his bargaining chips with Annan state were also greatly reduced. In other words, all the actions of the Burning Legion in Tianan this time could be said to be basically fruitless. But at the same time, they suffered heavy losses and provoked a strong enemy. It was a complete failure. The extreme unwillingness almost swallowed all of Ramelan's reason. He gritted his teeth, and his face was completely distorted. In just a few seconds, he wanted to order the whole army to attack more than once. He wanted to fight to the death with Li Tianlan and all the paratroopers in front of him. But years of calmness finally made him suppress the impulse. In the worsening battle situation, everyone in the Burning Legion heard Ramelan's hoarse and twisted order with strong unwillingness. Burning Legion, retreat, retreat. Break through to the south. Yes, retreat. No matter how unwilling he was, the situation had become like this. The last trace of reason made Ramelan make the most important and the most correct decision. Give up. Give up Tunan City, give up the 3 military bases, and even give up some of the elites of the Burning Legion. Retreat. They could only retreat. Ramelan stared at Li Tianlan and roared. He gritted his teeth and turned to break through to the south without looking back. Li Tianlan, whose face was pale but breath was still fierce, sneered. He was about to chase after him when he saw a lurker flying over from afar. The 4th lurker. The lurker didn't turn invisible. It quickly flew over Li Tianlan. The signal light flashed slightly. An incomparably eye-catching streak of bright red drifted down from the cabin door of the lurker. It was a figure covered from head to toe in a red robe. The landing point of the red robe was very clear. It was in front of Li Tianlan. To be exact, it was between Li Tianlan and Ramelan. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and a touch of fierceness flashed in the depths of his eyes. This was the best time to kill Ramelan. In 10 minutes, Ramelan would die in Li Tianlan's hands. If he was allowed to retreat, it would inevitably be a big problem in the future. But without the firepower of the lurker, it would be difficult for him to kill Ramelan with the firepower of the 3rd base alone. His communication with the attackers of the 3 bases had been cut off. So far, he still didn't know what had happened. His plan was to directly hit Ramelan at the beginning and then hold up the entire Burning Legion. If Li Badian and others could take down the 3 military bases, their powerful firepower could completely destroy everything in the Burning Legion. If they couldn't take them down for a while, then he would kill Ramelan and the Burning Legion would retreat. But with the appearance of the lurker, the 3 military bases didn't play a role, and the lurker didn't want him to kill Ramelan at this time. Such a victory was inevitable for him. The red robe fluttered in the air and landed in front of Li Tianlan. The 3 lurkers chased after the Burning Legion, still pouring out firepower. Li Tianlan hesitated. Looking at the red robe in front of him, he narrowed his eyes and said nothing. "Greetings, Your Highness." The red robe stood in front of Li Tianlan and bowed deeply. His voice was respectful and calm. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He looked at him and pointed at the lurker in the sky and the airborne soldiers who were chasing after them. "Are these your people?" He looked at the red robe and asked, "Why are you helping me?" "To be exact, from now on, they are all your soldiers, Your Highness." The red robe kept bowing and didn't look up. "My people?" Li Tianlan laughed. "What if I let them destroy the Burning Legion and kill Ramelan now?" "No problem." The red robe's voice was low. He kept bowing respectfully. "Your will is above everything. But I think it's better for you to let Ramelan live at this time." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He didn't ask why it was better. He just said quietly, "Who are you?" "Chief Red-Robed Archbishop Chatu of the New Stream." "Greetings, Your Highness." The red robe bowed again and his voice was calm. "The New Stream. Chief Red-Robed Archbishop." Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows with undisguised astonishment. He had heard of the New Stream, but he didn't know much about it. When he was in Eastern Europe, he read the materials of the Vatican and the Eastern Church. It was also then that he heard of the New Stream. Like the Vatican and the Eastern Church, the New Stream was also one of the most influential religious schools. It believed in the same God as the Eastern Church and the Vatican, but its doctrine was somewhat different. The new stream was mainly concentrated in East Asia and Southeast Asia. In Zhongzhou State, the new stream was more influential than the Eastern Church and the Vatican. But internationally, the new stream was the weakest of the three major schools. Li Tianlan didn't expect that it was the new stream who helped him this time, and it was the chief red-robed archbishop. Li Tianlan didn't know much about this position. But in terms of position, Chatu should be second only to the two of them in the new stream. The new stream was different from the Vatican and the Eastern Church. In the new stream, the Holy Virgin was above everything, and her position was higher than the Pope. If Chatu was really the chief red-robed archbishop of the new stream, then his position was second only to the Holy Virgin. The Pope was the third person in the new stream. Li Tianlan looked at Chatu and was silent for a long time. Things were so weird that his mind suddenly became a little confused. The strength of the new stream was indeed out of his expectation. But since most of their forces were concentrated in Southeast Asia and East Asia, it was not surprising that they had such a powerful force. But the question was, why would Chatu give him such a powerful force? Concealers and paratroopers, not to mention the new stream, it would not be easy for the Vatican to give them. This gift was indeed a bit strange. Your Excellency Cha, Li Tianlan calmed himself down and said slowly, why does the new stream help me? It is the will of Her Highness the Holy Virgin. It is also the will of His Excellency the Pope. Chatu didn't straighten his back and said with his head lowered. I don't know them. Li Tianlan said flatly. Your Highness, you don't have to doubt our sincerity. You may not know the Holy Virgin and the Pope, but we have a key person that you can trust. He took off the communicator on his ear, carefully adjusted the channel, and then handed it to Li Tianlan. We have blocked most of the communication signals in Tianan. But in order to hide ourselves, I hope you don't talk too long. Li Tianlan took it, squinted, put on the communicator, and said hello. Tianlan? A soft and dreamy voice came to Li Tianlan's ears. How are you now? Li Tianlan was stunned. At this moment, all his doubts disappeared. He raised his eyebrows and seemed to be in disbelief. You are the Holy Virgin of the new stream? Of course not. I am your woman. Qin Weibai chuckled. Qin Weibai chuckled. But I was worried that you wouldn't let Saint go to Tianan with you, so I found someone to help you. The new stream is our friend. Tianlan, they can be trusted. But at present, the new stream is still in the stage of hiding its strength, so the weapons and equipment that appeared on the battlefield this time, as well as the airborne soldiers, are not suitable to return to the new stream. After all, there are too many of them, and if they make a big noise, Anan will easily notice. Except for Chatu, these people will join Emperor Dong's palace and become your soldiers. Of course, they are not free. We have to pay the new stream. No problem. Li Tianlan was a little confused, and he said subconsciously. He looked at the lurker flying farther and farther away. As the situation in Reki City became more and more stable, Li Tianlan was no longer short of money. But things like the lurker could not be bought with money. In addition, there was a group of lurkers about to arrive in Tianan. Li Tianlan's air power had become more and more powerful. Well, that's it. Qin Weibai said softly, Tianlan, are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Li Tianlan shook his head. Ramiro is no match for me. It's just a small injury, and he will recover soon. I know you are the strongest. Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, in this case, I suggest not to kill Ramiro for the time being. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said nothing. Qin Weibai said softly, given the current situation in Tianan, you need an enemy who is strong enough but can be suppressed by you. Otherwise, many things will become a little troublesome. Tianlan, this time, Emperor Dong's palace has gained a lot. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. This time, the gains were indeed great. The strong intervention of the new stream not only changed the situation in Tunan, but also the situation in the three military bases. The firepower of the three military bases was preserved to the greatest extent. The Burning Legion suffered heavy losses, and Li Tianlan got a few of the most advanced lurkers and the elite airborne soldiers of the new stream. It could be said that his powers suddenly expanded. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan believed that the giant group would support him more. As for the academics, it was not a big problem. But the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group would definitely take action. What Li Tianlan valued most were the 3 military bases in Tunan. But now that the situation was like this, Li Tianlan did not want to return Tunan City, which belonged to the Freedom Corps. With Tunan City as the core, the 3 military bases and the upcoming air force would be enough to defend his base camp. In this way, Li Tianlan would have money, manpower, and enough military power. In terms of personal combat capability, Li Tianlan had also proved that he was formidable. It could be said that Emperor Dong's palace had all the conditions for a rising force. The only thing they lacked was the foundation. As he absorbed the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the foundation could be partly made up. That was to say, from now on, Emperor Dong's palace had become the real opponent in the eyes of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The two groups would probably use countless small tricks to prevent Li Tianlan from getting what he deserved. Keeping Ramiro, who had suffered heavy losses, would allow him to gain a foothold in Tianan and maintain a certain aggressiveness. Li Tianlan's role in Tianan would become more important. More importantly, Li Tianlan could also take advantage of this to grasp all the power in his hands. As for the reason, it was to fight against the Burning Legion. He could even ask Zhongzhou State to give him more support. As for whether the support was given or not, it did not matter. At least the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group could do nothing about what he had already grasped. Li Tianlan pondered and did not speak. There's no hurry to take revenge. Tianlan, we haven't gained a firm foothold yet. The most important thing is to settle down. As for the Burning Legion and Ramiro, let them live a little longer, okay? Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said calmly, I see. He paused and asked, what's the matter with the new stream? Who's their Holy Virgin? The new stream respected the Holy Virgin, but their Holy Virgin had always been the most mysterious. She seemed to be hidden in the clouds and never appeared in public. Most of the time, it was the Pope who handled the affairs of the new stream. This seemed to be similar to the Vatican, but in the new stream, the Holy Virgin's position was clearly higher than the Pope. She could be said to be the highest will of the new stream. The fact that Qin Weibai could get in touch with the new stream at least showed that she had a certain friendship with the Holy Virgin. Qin Weibai paused for a moment, but her voice did not sound different. She just said softly, can we talk about this when you come back from this? The Holy Virgin. If there's a chance, I'll introduce her to you. Qin Weibai said the last sentence with some reluctance. Li Tianlan said yes. Then I'll hang up. Qin Weibai smiled and cut off the communication. Li Tianlan looked at Jia Tu, who was still bending over in front of him, and suddenly said, stand up straight and talk. Jia Tu straightened up and looked at Li Tianlan with a calm smile. Are you also going to join Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan asked. I'll go back to the new stream. If I'm alone, I can avoid the temptation of Annan State, Zhongzhou State, and other forces. But these followers will be your Highness's soldiers from now on. They are the real fanatics, willing to sacrifice everything. Sounds good. Li Tianlan nodded. If your Highness can join the new stream, it will be easier to command them. Maybe in the future, not only them, but more fanatics will fight for your Highness. Jia Tu said respectfully. I'll join the new stream? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, wear the red robe too. As long as you're devout enough, you can become the Pope. He hesitated for a moment. The new stream has a Holy Virgin. Her Highness can also make a Holy Son. Li Tianlan did not give an answer. He just looked at the Burning Legion getting farther and farther away. Catch up, he suddenly said, we can spare Ramiro, but the Burning Legion must pay a higher price. As you wish. Jia Tu bowed slightly and said softly, Communication Channel 2, and your Highness's 7 hidden fighters. They are the Angel Holy War Squadron of the new stream. Number 1 has taken down the first base and is with His Excellency Ning Chenqing, waiting for your order. Li Tianlan glanced at him and adjusted the communication channel to Channel 2. Number 1? This is Li Tianlan. Your Highness. A calm voice sounded in the communication channel. Are you with Xianxia? I want to talk to him, Li Tianlan said. Number 1 answered, and then his voice sounded softly. His Highness Li Tianlan wants to talk to you. Tianlan? Ning Xianxia's hesitant voice sounded on the other end of the communication channel. Well, are you okay? Li Tianlan asked. Fortunately, we didn't lose much. Ning Xianxia laughed and was a little confused. What's the matter with these hidden fighters? Li Tianlan could not explain it in a short time, so he just said calmly, they are all on our side now. Tell all the hidden fighters in the 3 bases to gather and hunt down the Burning Legion. I'll leave this to you. Ramiro doesn't have to die, but we must kill as many of their elites as possible. As for the 3 bases, let Eagle King and Baiyan communicate. We must take control of the bases as soon as possible. Understood. Ning Xianxia responded, sounding a little excited. Li Tianlan hung up the communication channel and turned to look at the ruins in his sight. He was silent for a long time before he said softly, From now on, Tunan is mine. Congratulations, Your Highness. Jia Tu smiled and bowed. I believe it won't be long before the entire Tianan is under your light. Chapter 710. When he hung up the phone, the sky above Yuzhou City had already lit up. The rising sun shrouded the capital of Zhongzhou State. In the hospital of the giant group, a lot of cleaning work had come to an end. At this time, the hospital had been completely surrounded by the garrison troops of Yuzhou. A division of troops was stationed here, armed to the teeth, and thousands of elite soldiers were cleaning up the battlefield. The blood had been washed away, and the wounded were being placed in batches. Due to some taboo in the sanatorium, there was no morgue. The corpses of the dead began to be transported in batches. The 2 inpatient buildings in the hospital had not completely collapsed, but the cracked stairs were crooked, which looked frightening. All the wounded inside had been picked up and temporarily placed in the staff dormitories of the hospital. The hospital had made contact with an official sanatorium under the control of the giant group, which had begun to send cars to pick up the wounded. An hour ago, Zhongzhou State Parliament member Dongqing Wudi, Zhongzhou State Parliament member Wu Jingmin, Zhongzhou State Parliament member, and Speaker of Yuzhou Bai Zhanfeng rushed to the hospital on behalf of Zhongzhou State to express their condolences. Dongqing Rushi, Tribulation, 4 spirit generals, and other important figures had been transferred in advance. The 3 high-level officials had left after expressing their condolences and began to prepare for the upcoming high-level meeting. Qin Weibai issued several orders in a row and then waited. Now that everything had a clear result, she, who had been tense all the time, finally breathed a sigh of relief. The room was silent. Military counselor and saints sat on the sofa in silence. After Flaming Fire left, Horsewoman, whose injury was barely stable, immediately appeared beside Qin Weibai and acted as her bodyguard. The 3 super masters of Samsara Palace had been waiting here, watching Qin Weibai give out orders one by one, but they remained silent all the time. Qin Weibai was also silent. She gripped her phone tightly in her fair hands, lowered her head, and didn't move an inch. The golden sunlight outside the window shone on her, and she looked like a beautiful statue bathed in golden light. The atmosphere in the room was extremely solemn. Military counselor wanted to speak several times, but he was stopped by Saint. Everyone was silent. The silence turned into contemplation, then solemnity, and finally helplessness. I told you. The military counselor smiled bitterly and said, the new stream is not a good card to play, at least not now, or it will be very troublesome. Saint glanced at military counselor, sighed, and said nothing. What can I do? After a moment of silence, Qin Weibai said faintly, I can't just watch Tianlan get into trouble. We all know who is standing behind the Burning Legion. How could the so-called number 1 legion in Africa be so simple? Even if Ramelin is no match for him, the people behind the Burning Legion will not let go of this opportunity. The new stream might not be able to do anything. Even if they show up a little later, the situation may change. I can risk anyone and anything, but nothing can happen to Tianlan. How is Tianan? Saint suddenly asked. The Burning Legion has retreated. Qin Weibai turned around and took 2 steps, sitting opposite the military counselor and Saint. Her dreamy and delicate face looked a little tired. In their own base camp, there is no need to doubt the fighting capacity of the new stream. Saint nodded. It had been about 6 or 7 hours since the Burning Legion raided Tunan City. The Burning Legion occupied Tianan, and then they were beaten back by Emperor Dong's palace. The sudden outbreak of the war was unimaginably rapid. Once such news spread, it was bound to shock the whole world. But for the few people in the room, it was nothing out of the ordinary. This time, the new stream sent a total of 10 concealers, 4 aircrafts, and nearly 3,000 paratroopers. Such an action was like a thunderbolt, which fully demonstrated the strength of the new stream. But the new stream was really not powerful. The biggest reason why the war was so terrifying was that Tunan City was the base camp of the new stream. The base camp of the new stream was not in Tianan, but in the neighboring kingdom of Tianan. Tianan was the most powerful enemy of the new stream and also one of the closest places to Tianan. Though the new stream was not the state religion in the kingdom of Tianan, it was strongly supported by the government of the kingdom of Tianan. The triangle between the kingdom of Tianan, the kingdom of Siam, and the kingdom of Wanta was the world-famous Golden Triangle. Most of the new stream's power was hidden in that war-torn area. Now that the conflict in Tunan had broken out, the new stream had reacted in the shortest time possible. But that was all. Outside of Southeast Asia, the new stream's power in other areas was pitifully small. To put it bluntly, there were 6 red cardinals in the new stream. Except for the chief red cardinal, Chatu, who was a master of the half-step invincible realm, the last 3 red cardinals were only in the fire-flaming realm. And their most important armed organization was the Holy War of Angels. Yes, it was the Holy War of Angels that appeared in Tianan tonight. It represented more than half of the armed forces of the new stream. Backed by the base camp, they used more than half of their resources. That was how the new stream showed its power to everyone today. With this kind of power, he could naturally help Li Tianlan defeat the Burning Legion. But there was only one problem. How are you going to explain it? Military counselor asked in a hoarse voice. He didn't look panicked, but there was obvious helplessness on his face. Qin Weibai didn't say anything. She turned her head slightly. Her perfect and flawless face looked a little pale in the sunlight. After a long time, she breathed softly and said, "I don't know." She couldn't explain it. The new stream couldn't explain it either. The Holy War of Angels joined Emperor Dong's palace. As the palace master, Li Tianlan would definitely study the power of the new stream. He would also show his support to the new stream and even meet the Holy Virgin of the new stream. But the problem now was that Li Tianlan couldn't meet the Holy Virgin of the new stream. And the Holy War of Angels was too important for the new stream. What kind of relationship did they have with Qin Weibai that made the new stream send more than half of its power to Emperor Dong's palace? There were too many things that couldn't be explained. Once there were too many of these things, some seemingly perfect lies would reveal flaws. The worst part was that there was almost no way to make up for such flaws. As long as Li Tianlan sensed something wrong and investigated carefully, he would find the truth behind all the perfection. Choose a new Holy Virgin? Horsewoman asked tentatively. Choose a new Holy Virgin? Qin Weibai smiled helplessly. The Pope won't agree. And the successor has been sent to Kunlun City. Now we don't have a suitable candidate. Anyway, we have to keep this a secret, Saint said in a low voice, or he'll go crazy. Military counselor's voice was a little sharp. We shouldn't have used the new stream. It's not the right time. What else can we do if we don't use the new stream? If His Highness doesn't let Saint go to Tianan, what about his safety? We're not worried about the Burning Legion, but the master behind it. If the new stream doesn't do anything, His Highness can deal with the Burning Legion, but he may not be able to deal with the enemy hiding in the dark. Horsewoman said coldly. Military counselor had been acting weird recently, and she naturally knew why. To some extent. She understood his loyalty and stubbornness, just like she understood Flaming Fire's loyalty and stubbornness. But respecting the original plan was also a kind of loyalty. Military counselor's position in the Samsara Palace was not just a role to complain. Military counselor glanced at Qin Weibai and said no more. Horsewoman stood up, poured a glass of warm water, and gently handed it to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai thanked him and held the glass in her small hand, saying nothing. The shallow rim of the glass reflected the lines of Qin Weibai's face. Horsewoman lowered her head, watching the clear warm water slightly moving in the glass. The trembling was so subtle, but it was real. It was uneasiness and confusion. Qin Weibai had no choice. How could she not know that it was the best choice for the new stream to hide in her hands? If the force that appeared in Tianan joined Emperor Dong's palace, it would certainly increase the power of Emperor Dong's palace. But the sudden change in status would not only test the mentality of the people inside Emperor Dong's palace, but also put Li Tianlan under more pressure while accepting the growth of his strength. But if these forces were hidden in her hands, there would not be such a problem. She belonged to Li Tianlan, so her power naturally belonged to Li Tianlan. Now that this force was exposed, at least the position of Emperor Dong's palace in Zhongzhou state was enough to produce many subtle changes in the current situation, not to mention whether the new stream would be exposed or not. But the problem was that Qin Weibai had no time to care about that. Li Tianlan didn't let Saint go to Tianan with him because he was worried about the hospital. Qin Weibai didn't insist because she was not sure if Saint could change the situation. This was the first time she worked for Li Tianlan's safety. She was careful and didn't care about hiding anything. She wanted everything to be foolproof. For now, she didn't want a newly developed Samsara palace to really face the force behind the Burning Legion. This was different from Li Tianlan sweeping the Wang family of Beihai alone. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, he was alone. If he swept Beihai and Zhongzhou state wouldn't suffer too much loss. But the confrontation between the two forces was the overall situation. A newly formed Emperor Dong's palace couldn't take any advantage. Once this happened, Qin Weibai had to use more trump cards to make up for it. Compared with the new stream, the cards in her hands were obviously more important and not mature enough. So Qin Weibai hoped that Li Tianlan would only target the Burning Legion. To achieve this goal, the best way was to let the master behind the Burning Legion see no hope of turning the tables. Qin Weibai had concerns, but how could the people behind the Burning Legion not have them? If they really looked into it, commanding the Burning Legion to attack the Freedom Corps and raiding Yuzhou was a real crime of treason. Under the situation where the defeat was certain, they didn't dare to expose themselves and could only continue to hide. Yes, it was hiding. Qin Weibai didn't think that there were any other masters in the Burning Legion except for Ramiro. Maybe Ramiro thought so, but Ramiro himself didn't know what else was hidden in his legion. Maybe any inconspicuous soldier in the Burning Legion was a master of the Thundershocking realm or even a half-step invincible realm. This kind of unstable factor was good for Ramiro in the war. But for Li Tianlan, it was a time bomb. Even if he could suppress Ramiro, he was bound to go all out. At that time, it would be hard for Li Tianlan to protect himself in the face of a sneak attack from one or two or even more masters at the peak of the Thundershocking realm or a half-step invincible realm. Qin Weibai didn't intend to provoke them at the moment, nor did she want to draw them out. The best way was to not let them take action. As long as there was no hope, they naturally wouldn't take action. So Qin Weibai put pressure on the new stream. The Angel Holy War arrived at the battlefield at the fastest speed. The military-armed satellites carried out accurate reconnaissance. The hidden ones swaggered through the streets. The invisible transport planes landed on the battlefield with a large number of airborne soldiers. Such a situation basically eliminated all the possibilities of the Burning Legion to turn the tables. The hidden forces in the Burning Legion would naturally continue to hide. No matter how unwilling they were, they had to accept this failure. The only thing Qin Weibai wanted to do was not to let anything happen to her man. That was all. As for what Li Tianlan would suspect if the new stream was exposed, and how she would explain it, she didn't have time to think about it during the race against time. Since the new stream has appeared, let's make the best use of it. Saint suddenly said, I suggest we communicate with the Plenitude State. Now the Plenitude State and Tianan have deployed military forces on the border. If Emperor Dong's palace can occupy Tunan City, we can build an air force base on the border of the plenitude state. With the air force, Emperor Dong's palace can truly gain a foothold. I'll arrange it. Qin Weibai took a sip of water and said softly, "If your highness really notices something in the future, I think we'd better have a reasonable explanation." Military counselors said blandly, "There's nothing to explain." Qin Weibai put down the cup and smiled. Her voice was a little sad. "In the worst case, I'll just tell him that I'm the virgin goddess of the new stream. Tunlan won't kill me." "He won't kill you, but how are you going to clean it up?" Military counselor looked straight into Qin Weibai's eyes and asked. "Of course, I'll just be abandoned again." Qin Weibai smiled softly. Her voice was extremely quiet. Military counselor stopped talking. Saint and Horsewoman also fell silent. The three heavenly kings looked at Qin Weibai and suddenly felt sorry for her. Everyone had a different fate, and everyone would encounter different things. But it seemed that she had been abandoned all her life. She had been abandoned by her biological parents. She had been abandoned by her adoptive parents. She had been abandoned by herself in Eastern Europe. Everything seemed to have become a habit. She had long been numb, so she had enough psychological preparation from the very beginning. "I'm tired." She was silent for a while and suddenly said softly. Saint sighed and stood up. "I'll go to the sanatorium with the wounded. During this time, I'll stay in Yuzhou to watch over them." His figure slowly disappeared in the room. Military counselor did not speak. In the slightly twisted air, his figure was also rapidly fading and eventually disappeared without a trace. Horsewoman sat next to Qin Weibai, glanced at her and asked, "Do you want breakfast?" She paused, then added, "Boss." Qin Weibai shook her head gently. Horsewoman stood up and walked out. Behind him, Qin Weibai sat there quietly, looking at the sunshine outside the window. Horsewoman at the door looked back at her. The sun still shrouded her perfect body. In the bright pale golden light and shadow, her figure looked extremely lonely and at a loss. When the Burning Legion retreated, the whole Tianan was instantly turbulent. No matter how fast the news was transmitted, it needed a process. The Burning Legion occupied Tunan City. When everyone was watching Zhongzhou State and what Emperor Dong's palace would do, every force in Tianan received the news of the Burning Legion's retreat almost at the same time. They were dumbfounded. Everyone listened to the information that was like a fairy tale with their mouths agape. As of 9 o'clock in the morning, the Burning Legion occupied Tunan City for the 7th hour. The Burning Legion came. The Burning Legion retreated. Before people could recover from the news that they occupied Tunan and seemed to be rising, a large number of elites of the Burning Legion had been chased out of Tunan like stray dogs. Bang! When the door was pushed open, Daybreak was still in a daze. He had expected that Li Tianlan's counterattack would be extremely fierce, but he did not expect it to be so fierce. It had not been long since he arrived in Tianan from Lin. Before he even had a specific plan, the Burning Legion had been defeated. The sound of the door hitting the door frame woke him up. He came to his senses, and there was a touch of surprise on his handsome, almost enchanting, feminine face. It was a thin middle-aged man who pushed the door open. He was the deputy hall master of Sunluo Hall in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He was one of the first people who faked death to enter the Purgatory of Heaven Capital from the border. His code name was Grey Darkness. He had been loyal to Li Guangtu over the years and could be said to be Daybreak's most important assistant. Daybreak looked at Grey Darkness, and Grey Darkness also looked at him. The two looked at each other for nearly 5 minutes, and then Daybreak slowly said, "What's going on?" What's going on? Not only Daybreak, but probably countless forces in the dark world were asking this question at this time. How do I know? Grey Darkness said angrily, "Now the situation is very obvious. We don't need to care about how it happened. The fact is the fact. The Burning Legion was defeated. Action." Daybreak's brain was a little slow. What else? Grey Darkness said helplessly, "Chess Emperor can't die in vain. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital should also show its strength. We can't let that little guy think that he can really easily annex the Purgatory of Heaven Capital." When Li Tianlan was very young, gray darkness left the border. He naturally had no feelings for Li Tianlan. Moreover, he followed Li Honghe to the border to avenge Li Guangtu. As a loyal follower of Li Guangtu's position in his heart had long been higher than Li Honghe's. Li Tianlan, who was not recognized by Li Guangtu, naturally had no weight in his heart. Daybreak took a deep breath and asked, "How are the preparations going?" "Almost." Gray Darkness said, "The Sunluo Hall is ready. In addition, there are 200 elites, which is our strongest force in Tiannan. Their average strength is at the fire-flaming realm. 300 people are enough to surprise the Burning Legion." "Is Ramelun dead?" Daybreak suddenly asked. "I don't know, but I don't think he's dead." "That's good. We can kill him with our own hands." Gray Darkness grinned grimly. "Anyway, he is in the invincible realm. How can he be killed so easily? The little guy is known as the future heavenly son. What is he now? He should be close to killing Ramelun. But according to his previous performance, Ramelun is not doing well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have retreated. It just so happens that you have also entered the invincible realm. This is an opportunity. We will set off immediately. You can kill Ramelun to establish your prestige." Daybreak shook his head with a bitter smile. "Don't underestimate Li Tianlan. If I were in my peak state, I might not be his match. Is there any specific news from Tunnan City? Have all our people lurking there been wiped out? How on earth did the Burning Legion lose? I can't be at ease if I don't figure it out. They are still there, but we can't get in touch with them at the moment. The signal near Tunnan City has been completely blocked, so we can't see what's going on there at the moment. Maybe Annan knows what's going on, but our relationship with them has been very stiff recently, so..." Gray Darkness shrugged. Daybreak frowned and said nothing. "There's nothing to worry about." Gray Darkness said blandly, "If the Burning Legion takes Tunnan City, they will already have the foundation of a superpower. But even if they retreat this time, as long as they are not completely wiped out and Ramelun is alive, Annan will fully support the Burning Legion to establish a foothold in Tiannan because they have no choice. So not only us, but other forces also don't want to see a new superpower rise in Tiannan. Everyone can play this game. Although I can't get the news from Tunnan City, other free forces such as the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, and the Jiang family of South America are ready to take action. With us leading the way, everyone will not sit still. There is no need to worry about fighting the Burning Legion that has just lost a battle. I'm worried about Li Tianlan," Daybreak said with a wry smile. "That's even more unnecessary. After all, the little guy's surname is Li. Even if His Highness doesn't approve of him, if he dares to touch the purgatory of Heaven Capital, as long as he dares to kill one person, he can forget about annexing the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future. We helped them block the retreat route of the Burning Legion, and the little guy should thank us." Daybreak was silent for a while, took a deep breath, and finally made up his mind. "Let's go." Gray Darkness grinned and turned around directly. 5 minutes later, amidst the chaotic footsteps, hundreds of SUVs rushed towards the direction of Tunnan City in a mighty manner. Almost at the same time, the elites of the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, and the Jiang family of South America also began to set off. Beating a drowning dog was something that everyone loved to do. For these superpowers, the rise of every new superpower meant the shrinkage of their existing interests, especially when most of the superpowers temporarily lost the protection of invincible realm experts. In the face of the Burning Legion with Ramelun, too many people hoped that it was just a flash in the pan in Tian. Retreat. 55 minutes after the war broke out in Tunnan, the Burning Legion finally began to retreat. The lurker, who was out of the invisible state, kept rising and finally reached the limit of the machine gun's range. At this height, it was out of the attack range of most invincible realm experts. The lurker, who had the absolute advantage in the air, chased after the Burning Legion unhurriedly and fired wildly. The formation was in complete disarray. The Burning Legion rushed out of Tunnan with the rebel army. Almost everyone rushed south without Ramelun's orders. Everyone knew that their reinforcements were already on the way. If they could meet up with the reinforcements, they might even have a chance to fight. Ramelun had been guarding at the back of the Burning Legion, playing the role of the retreat. He was the commander of the Burning Legion, and no matter how reluctant he was, he had to stand there. It was not only because of the lurker in the air, but also because of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's move of burning heaven in the crowd had traumatized him too much. At this time, if Li Tianlan caught up with them and did the same thing in the dense retreat, the morale of the Burning Legion would probably completely collapse. After all, no matter how elite they were still human beings and knew fear and retreat. Bullets whistled all over the sky. Ramalan kept opening his domain to block the whistling bullets. His physical strength was declining rapidly, but he still gritted his teeth and held on. The Burning Legion he had brought with him were all elites. It would be a good thing if one less died. If all of them died here today, the strength of the Burning Legion would be weakened by almost a third. No matter what, even if he had to risk his life, Ramalan would try his best to protect this group of people. This would be his biggest trump card in the future rise in the Dark World. Out of Tunin, it was the wilderness that could be seen everywhere in Tianan. The sky was high and the earth was wide. Ramalan, whose physical strength had been exhausted, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He roared, "Attention, Burning Legion! Scatter and retreat! Gather at the third location. Hurry, hurry, hurry." With his voice, the Burning Legion and the rebels didn't do anything. An obvious whistling sound rang out again. The rotors rotated in the air. The delicate and small lurker flew at a high altitude and swooped down at an incredible speed. The machine gun and extremely powerful sound roared wildly. Bullets! For a moment, everyone's eyes were filled with bullets flying wildly. 1, 2, 5, 8, 10. There were a total of 10 lurkers. The lurkers of the 3 military bases had completely converged. They followed the Burning Legion and kept firing. The momentum was incomparably fierce. At the same time, burning shells flew from afar and smashed into Ramalan's domain. The roar of the explosion filled everything. That was the direction of the 2nd military base. The 2nd military base was the military base with the fiercest firepower among the 3 bases in Tunin. Obviously, after the base fell into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace, they had completely removed the influence of electromagnetic weapons and repaired the weapon system. The heavy firepower that Ramalan had given to the rear to defeat Li Tianlan continued to bombard the Burning Legion, causing a large number of explosions in the battle formation. Li Tianlan didn't chase after them. However, the endless artillery fire combined with the attacks of the lurkers was endless. With such a chase, the Burning Legion couldn't even find their target. The lurkers? They couldn't hit them at all. The 2nd military base? It was dozens of miles away from here. Without a target, they didn't even have a chance to fight. The only thing they could do was retreat, escape, and hide. Eventually, they would be bombarded into flesh and blood under the increasingly intense artillery fire. The scene of a fiasco was never pleasant to watch. But for the victors, there was an indescribable sense of heroism. At 11 o'clock in the morning, in just a few hours, the Burning Legion had been running all the way. They were far stronger than the elites of most armies, and in just 2 hours, they had covered a distance of almost 60 kilometers. It was just that the majestic retreating army had now become sparse and scattered. Tens of thousands of rebel soldiers were completely wiped out after distancing themselves from the Burning Legion. The frenzied slaughter continued to spread. Starting from Tunin, the wilderness of nearly 100 kilometers was completely dyed red with blood. The Burning Legion's 9,000 elites were reduced to less than 3,000. They abandoned all the bodies of the dead and even abandoned the wounded. They fled all the way. At this moment, all the ammunition of the lurkers had been completely consumed, and the Burning Legion had officially escaped the range of the 2nd base's firepower. The lurkers stopped, circled in the air fearlessly, and began to return to Tunin. Ramon supported his body with all his might to prevent himself from falling. He kept panting as he watched the lurkers return in the sky, getting farther and farther away. Looking at the corpses and blood on the ground behind him, he finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. "Commander!" Everyone in the vicinity rushed over to support Ramiro. Ramon's body trembled. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'm fine. Let's go back. Where else can you go? A laughing voice suddenly sounded in the sky. Your Highness Ramon, why don't you come with me to the purgatory of heaven capital? Ramon suddenly raised his head. Everyone looked up at the same time. Daybreak and gray darkness appeared in the sky. A thin but extremely clear domain spread out from Daybreak's body, covering nearly 100 meters around Ramon. Daybreak looked down at Ramon with a cold gaze. In the distance, hundreds of figures appeared in the burning legion's sight. Without hesitation, they charged. The Dark Azura Temple was in front, and the ordinary elites were behind. A crazy charge. There was finally a flash of despair in Ramon's eyes. Purgatory of heaven capital. He roared with the last of his strength. Daybreak smiled and said calmly, "Since you don't want to go back with me, I'll send you on your way." The domain of hundreds of meters suddenly twisted as he attacked. The entire space was turbulent and became blurred in an instant. Blood sprayed wildly in the burning legion's formation. The domain continued to compress and directly pressed toward Ramon. "Watch out!" A furious roar suddenly sounded behind Daybreak. Daybreak's expression changed, but it was too late to move. The next second, a huge impact directly hit Daybreak. Gray Darkness's whole body rushed over and knocked Daybreak away. Swish! The sword light flashed on Gray Darkness's body for a moment. Bang! With a dull explosion, Gray Darkness's whole body directly collapsed into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The two extremely faint sword lights paused for a moment and disappeared instantly. Gray Darkness! Daybreak's eyes suddenly turned red. If he hadn't been knocked away by Gray Darkness just now, he might have been the one torn apart by the sword light. Daybreak roared wildly. The domain completely broke out and swept in all directions. In an instant, two subtle sword intents that could almost deceive the perception of an invincible realm expert suddenly condensed together and directly pierced Daybreak's heart. The two swords combined. The invincible strike. Chapter 7:11. It was swift, agile, weak, and cold. The surrounding heaven and earth seemed to become still in an instant. The extremely fast sword light became unprecedentedly clear in the completely still environment. The domain enveloped the whole area in a mighty manner. In Daybreak's sight, two beams of sword light that would be ignored if he didn't pay attention to them merged together. There were two vague figures flashing in the air. In the blink of an eye, the sword edge shining with cold light had reached his chest. It was completely silent. Daybreak, who had entered the invincible realm, couldn't even do basic dodging. When death came, he just instinctively turned his body sideways. His movements seemed to become slow under the sword light. No one could tell how far he moved sideways. Maybe it was 1 centimeter, maybe it was 2 centimeters. As soon as his body moved, the sword edge had already pierced through his chest. The splashing blood was incomparably gorgeous in the sun. A large area of the domain suddenly exploded with Daybreak's serious injury. Two muffled groans suddenly sounded and then went away in an instant. The next second, the vague figure had already reached Ramiro's side. Daybreak's face was pale. While blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, Ramiro's figure had already been wrapped by the sword light and disappeared in an instant. Everything happened too fast. From beginning to end, it only took 2 or 3 seconds. The killing intent of heaven and earth within 100 meters was surging. The deputy temple master of the Dark Azura Hall, Gray, saved Daybreak at the critical moment, but he himself became flesh and blood all over the sky. He died without a whole body, and Daybreak was seriously injured on the spot. Ramiro left the battlefield. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, the two beams of flowing light that flashed in the air had completely changed the situation. Daybreak's body swayed in the air and finally managed to stabilize. He looked in the direction where Ramiro had disappeared. The corner of his mouth moved, but he didn't say anything. An indescribable fear swept across the battlefield. The situation of surviving the disaster, the anger of failing the task, and the grief of losing a close friend surged in. Daybreak felt dizzy. In just a few seconds, he could be said to have really experienced death. If Grey Dark hadn't stepped forward, even if he was an expert of the invincible realm, he wouldn't have survived under that sword. The two assassins themselves weren't too strong. They were ordinary experts of the half-step invincible realm, but their sword intents were of the same origin, and their minds were connected. Once their full power erupted in an instant and formed a joint force, it was the real sword energy of the invincible realm. This was the most traditional assassin, and also the best assassin. The lurking skill that could hide from the invincible realm, the sword intent that was condensed to the extreme without any momentum, the full outbreak of breaking through the limit in an instant, and the lethality that could not be guarded against. Calm, stealthy, decisive. Once his attack failed, he immediately retreated. Such two assassins were not powerful when they were alone, but under the right opportunity, they were enough to pose a fatal threat to most of the invincible realm experts below the peak of the invincible realm. Daybreak was absent-minded. He remembered the heavenly Luo Palace in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Or rather, it was a sigh. If the two assassins fought alone with their ultimate strength, they might not be the opponents of Cool Breeze or Drifting Cloud of Sai City. But once they joined forces, their lethality was far greater than that of Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. The most terrifying thing was that Daybreak had never heard of such assassins before. He took a deep breath. The moment his chest rose and fell, a large amount of blood burst out from the tiny wounds. Daybreak swallowed the blood in his mouth. He wanted to say something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, he suddenly lost his strength and fell from the air. The darkness completely swallowed his will. His body fell directly on the grass. At the same time that the Burning Legion began to retreat, in the conference room of the Zhongzhou State Parliament in the Hidden Dragon Sea in Yuzhou, the high-level meeting convened by President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State had officially begun. 10 people from Zhongzhou State attended this meeting. In addition to the 9 council members, there was also Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State. There was no counselor in the large conference room. It was empty and cold, but it looked more and more solemn. Gu Xingyun sat at the conference table, drinking tea in silence, feeling the solemn and oppressive atmosphere around him, expressionless. He knew very well what it meant that the meeting had been delayed until now. Li Huaqing was waiting. The first was to wait for Dongqing Wudi from Lin and to rush back to Yuzhou. The second was to wait for him. The distance from Kunlun to Yuzhou was far longer than the distance from Lin and to Yuzhou. So the meeting began as soon as Gu Xingyun arrived at the Hidden Dragon Sea. The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth twitched, but he remained calm. Everyone is here. Let's start the meeting. In the main seat of the conference room, facing the national flag and emblem, Li Huaqing's bright and sharp eyes swept across the conference room. He said in a deep voice, "Everyone, what happened in Tiannan? Before the meeting began, a document has been formed and sent to you. For more than 3 years, we have poured a lot of effort into the Freedom Corps. But just a few hours ago, the Burning Legion raided Tunnan City, where the Freedom Corps was stationed. The Legion suffered heavy losses and Tunnan City fell, which means that we have lost more than half of our support to the Freedom Corps in the past few years. What do you think about this matter?" There was silence. The fall of Tunnan City was too sudden. Even now, the giants of Zhongzhou State were still thinking about countermeasures. This matter was too sensitive, and they could not swallow this loss. Zhongzhou State never had the style of being beaten without fighting back. And if they really tolerated it this time, the Burning Legion was bound to be insatiable, and the Freedom Corps would not even be able to stand in Tiannan in the future. Give up Tiannan? Zhongzhou State did not have this option. Revenge must be taken, but the most important thing was how to do it. In the case that Zhongzhou State was not suitable to expose too much territorial ambition to Tiannan, it was actually difficult for them to find a way to quickly attack the Burning Legion. In the silence, Li Huaqing slightly narrowed his eyes and shifted his gaze. His gaze fell on the expressionless Gu Xingyun, and he suddenly said in a deep voice, "Your Highness Gu Xingyun, what do you think? Of course we have to fight back. The importance of Tiannan to Zhongzhou State is self-evident. In recent years, the situation in Southeast Asia is very sensitive. If we can control Tiannan, we can greatly relieve the pressure in the south of Zhongzhou State. Moreover, The Burning Legion is too arrogant and domineering. If we don't teach them a lesson, they will really think that there is no one in Zhongzhou State who can do that. Gu Xingyun looked calm and said, Kunlun City is willing to carry out the task of attacking the Burning Legion. His voice was calm, without any emotion. As the war god of Zhongzhou State, his statement was very in line with his identity. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him. Gu Xingyun met his gaze without avoiding it. But he was a little impatient in his heart. As he said, Kunlun City was willing to accept the task of repelling the Burning Legion. As long as the parliament agreed, Kunlun City could gather a super luxurious lineup, but it did not need to face a real war. He had always thought that the Burning Legion was just a dog of Kunlun City. As the master, the Burning Legion could only give up what Kunlun City wanted. So Gu Xingyun was very sure that he would not even suffer any loss when he took back Tunan City. He just pretended to fight, repelled the Burning Legion, and recovered Tunan City. A great credit would fall on Kunlun City's head. After this battle, Emperor Dong's palace suffered a heavy blow and its strength declined. Kunlun City took advantage of this matter to stabilize the situation. After the internal unification of ideas, they went to plot against Tiannan. Yes, plot against Tiannan. As long as Kunlun City could recover Tunan City, it would not give up Tunan to the Freedom Corps. At that time, Kunlun City would come forward and cooperate with the Prince Group to take the Freedom Corps from the Giant Group. When occupying Ningbian and Tunan, Kunlun City would replace Ning Ziyuan and become one of the strongest forces in Tiannan while suppressing Emperor Dong's palace. With the cooperation of the Burning Legion, Kunlun City would unify Tiannan soon. After taking over Tiannan, even if Gu Xingyun retired later, Kunlun City had enough foundation and could still become one of the strongest forces in Zhongzhou State. In time, they would transform into a super force and become the second Wang family of Beihai. In this matter, Gu Xingyun did not even have a strong competitor. Emperor Dong's palace? Emperor Dong's palace, which had just suffered a great loss, did not deserve to compete with Kunlun City. The Wang family of Beihai? Beihai province, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Southeast Group were in a mess after being defeated by Li Tianlan, and Wang Tianzong was missing. At this time, the Wang family of Beihai had to deal with the internal turmoil first and then face the pressure from Zhongzhou State. They would not compete with Kunlun City either. As long as Kunlun City could seize this opportunity, they would almost be invincible in the future. Show them what we're made of? Li Huaqing squinted at Gu Xingyun and suddenly said, How sure are you, Your Highness? When the war breaks out, no one can say that they are 100% sure, but Kunlun City will try its best. With the strength of Kunlun City, we have at least a 70% chance of winning over Tunan. Gu Xingyun said blandly. He did not say it too confidently, but a 70% chance of winning was not low in any case. Kunlun City is really well prepared. Dongqing Wudi suddenly sneered. Gu Xingyun raised his eyelids and said blandly, What do you mean, Minister Dongqing? I don't mean anything and I don't want to. To anyone. But don't you think it's too much of a coincidence? Tonight, not only Tunan was attacked, but also the private hospital in Yuzhou. We have always kept the situation of the private hospital confidential, but those crazy thugs have clearly grasped the situation of the wounded in the hospital. Their actions are very targeted. This is a premeditated raid, and the goal is very clear. They want not only Tiannan, but also the East Emperor Palace and the Li family. Dongqing Wudi's tone was cold. What happened tonight? I think someone deliberately leaked the news to the Burning Legion, which is the important reason for the fall of Tunan and the attack on the hospital. In other words, someone committed treason. Everyone's heart shook fiercely. Treason. This word had always had an unusual meaning in Zhongzhou State in recent years, and such an accusation was even more shocking when it came from the mouth of a council member of Zhongzhou State Parliament. When he said this, Dongqing Wudi's eyes were fixed on Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun's expression was indifferent, but his eyes suddenly became sharp. Minister, do you mean that you suspect that Kunlun City leaked the news? He stared at Dongqing Wudi with awe-inspiring momentum. I'm just thinking about who has the motive to do so. Dongqing Wudi said blandly. Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes and did not speak. To be honest, he was really not afraid of Dongqing Wudi's suspicion. He did hire the Burning Legion to raid Tunan City and the hospital, and it was also his order. But there was no clue or evidence for this matter. He had absolute confidence that Zhongzhou State would not catch him, so he was not afraid at all. He would be suspected, which was something he had been psychologically prepared for before he came. In fact, it was most normal for Zhongzhou State to suspect him now, especially these council members in front of him. These were the figures standing at the peak of Xianxia State today. The future of Xianxia State was currently in their hands, and they all knew Xianxia State's future plan. They made the next plan to target the Wang family of Beihai, which the Wang family of Beihai also knew. Moreover, when Wang Tianzong was missing, the Wang family of Beihai was eager to stabilize the situation and face the next game, so they would not make trouble to cooperate with the Burning Legion. But tonight, the Burning Legion's purpose was too strong. It was obvious that they were targeting the Li family and Li Tianlan. Within Zhongzhou State, when Li Guangtu's identity was exposed, Li Honghe died, and Li Tianlan rose, there were only two forces that were eager to target the Li family. The first was the Wang family of Beihai, but they were busy now. The second was Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun was seriously injured, and the situation of Kunlun City was not optimistic. But because of this, it was more likely that Gu Xingyun would do something desperate. This was a very logical speculation. Zhongzhou State still insisted on calling him to this high-level meeting when it knew that he was seriously injured, which also showed that Zhongzhou State had locked its suspicious eyes on him. But it was still the same sentence. There was no evidence. Gu Xingyun did not leave any evidence. So he was not afraid of any suspicion. The timing of the Burning Legion's appearance is too coincidental. Is it their own decision to appear in Tiannan, or is it some kind of employment or transaction? It's worth investigating. In a flat and steady voice, Zhou Mulin, another director of the giant group, raised his head and looked at the crowd. He said slowly, "Investigate this matter from within Zhongzhou State. Maybe there will be clues." Of course we have to investigate, but this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is what about Tunan? Chen Fangqing, the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, smiled. The voice of the leader of the Prince Group was extremely cold. In any case, we have to go to Tiannan as soon as possible. President, comrades, I have a suggestion. Everyone subconsciously sat up straight. Li Huaqing's expression also became solemn. What's the Prime Minister's suggestion? If the President was the leader of the party in Zhongzhou State, then from the national level, the Prime Minister was the spokesperson of Zhongzhou State. Moreover, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing was extremely strong. Whether internally or externally, he rarely compromised. Li Huaqing had to seriously consider his opinion. Since the Burning Legion can appear in Tiannan, why can't Zhongzhou State? Zhongzhou State once said that it had no territorial ambitions for Tiannan, but that was when Tiannan was occupied by the rebels. Everyone thought that Annan State could quickly recover Tiannan, but now 3 years have passed. It turns out that Annan State no longer has the strength to recover Tiannan. Tiannan has now become a real ownerless land. It's time for Zhongzhou State to change its original position. He was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "What's the status of the Burning Legion in Africa?" Dongqing Wudi hesitated and said lightly, "It's the first legion in Africa, but its sphere of influence is not as great as that of the Divine Martial Corps. The reason why it is called the first is the strength of Ramelun and the comprehensive combat capability of the Burning Legion. In terms of scale and territory, they are not as good as the Divine Martial Corps. But in West Africa, there are also 2 small countries under the control of the Burning Legion." Chen Fangqing nodded and continued to ask, "Which 2 countries?" "Sankar and Landka," Dongqing Wudi said. As the actual head of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the situation in Africa was one of the focuses he should pay attention to. The problem is very simple. Chen Fangqing nodded. "Order the Divine Martial Corps to declare war on Sankar and Landka. At the same time, we accuse Sankar and Landka at the United Nations Conference. It's a fact that the Burning Legion entered Tiannan. It's a fact that Sankar and Landka invaded Asia. Such behavior has undermined the stability of Asia and also posed a threat to Xianxia state. We are obliged to take action. Let the whole Black Dragon army attack, destroy the Burning Legion, and take down the entire Tiannan. Don't worry about anything. He paused, looked at the changing faces of the directors, and said lightly, "When it's time to be tough, we should be tough." No one spoke. For a moment, everyone was speechless. Accuse Songker and Lanka of invading Asia at the United Nations conference? That was a joke. Even in West Africa, Songker and Lanka were not strong countries. In a small place, it was suicide to encroach on Asia and provoke Xianxia state. But the action of the Burning Legion could be interpreted in this way. I agree with the Prime Minister. As soon as Chen Fangqing finished speaking, Guo Wenian, the president of the National Assembly and another tycoon of the Prince Group, said, "The Divine Martial Army is the force of the Wang family of Beihai and also the force of Xianxia state. At the critical moment, the Divine Martial Army is obliged to make contributions to Xianxia state. Attacking Songker and Lanka can also contain the Burning Legion. If the Black Dragon army attacks Tunan City, the Burning Legion may not be able to stop it. Ramelin must make a choice. As long as we prove that we must take down Tunan and even the whole Tiannan, Ramelin can't fight to the death. His biggest possibility is to give up Tiannan and retreat to Africa." Guo Wenian knocked on the table heavily. "Just because we are Xianxia state." Yes, just because they could represent Xianxia state. Xianxia state was the most powerful country in the world. Once Xianxia state made it clear that it didn't care about anything, the Burning Legion alone wouldn't be able to hold Tiannan. Songk and Lanka were their rear. The rear would be attacked by the Divine Might Legion, and the front would be suppressed by Xianxia state. Any smart person would know what to do. Retreat and return to defend were what Ramelin had to do. Li Huaqing's heart skipped a beat. He quickly shifted his gaze and glanced at Chen Fangqing. He didn't know if it was intentional or a coincidence, but Chen Fangqing's gaze also turned to him. The president and the prime minister looked at each other for a moment and then past each other. Li Huaqing's eyes flickered. He understood what Chen Fangqing meant. Letting the Divine Martial Army start a war in Africa was not only to contain the Burning Legion, but also to contain the Wang family of Beihai. The Divine Martial Army was the most powerful non-staff force of the Wang family of Beihai in Africa, or even in the world. Nearly 300,000 elites were stationed in Africa for a long time. The army was strong and well-trained, and it could be said to be the worst and most powerful retreat of the Wang family of Beihai. Once Xianxia state and the Wang family of Beihai began to play, the Wang family of Beihai, who didn't dare to sit still and wait for death, would definitely play all their cards. At that time, the Divine Martial Army would become the most important bargaining chip in the Wang family of Beihai's hands. But once the war in Africa broke out, the Divine Martial Army would attack Songk and Lanka, and the Burning Legion would definitely give up Tiannan. How could Ramiro be willing to let his rear be occupied by the Divine Martial Army? At that time, the largest legion in Africa and the first legion in Africa were bound to collide. Such a collision would not determine the winner or loser in a short time. Instead, it would take up all the energy of both sides. Since the Burning Legion was known as the first legion in Africa, after a long time, the Divine Martial Army would definitely be no match for it. Maybe they would even ask for help from the Wang family of Beihai. This was tantamount to destroying one of the trump cards of the Wang family of Beihai, and it could even take up more of the Wang family of Beihai's energy. With the attack of the Burning Legion in Tiannan, Chen Fangqing had actually begun to prepare for the next game. Prime Minister, maybe you don't know, but the headquarters of the Divine Martial Army is in North Africa, far away from Songk and Lanka. If the war breaks out, the battle line will be too long, and the Divine Martial Army may not be at an advantage. They do have the obligation to fight for Xianxia state, but such a war will consume too much energy. I think we should carefully consider it. Vice President Wan Qingyun of Xianxia state gritted his teeth, and there was a flash of anger in his eyes. As the leader of the Southeast Group, he knew very well that once the Divine Martial Army was mentioned, the direction of this meeting would change. To be honest, it was indeed important for the Burning Legion to take down Tunan, but it was not an unsolvable problem for Zhongzhou state. If this problem could be used to link the game with the Wang family of Beihai, Zhongzhou state would rather this matter be solved slowly. But as the spokesperson of the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou state, Wan Qingyun naturally did not want them to do as they wished. This matter really needs to be carefully considered. If we brazenly send troops to take down Tian'an, Annan state will definitely protest. At that time, Zhongzhou state will be under great pressure. Ji Wenzhang, the director of the Ministry of Supervision, said flatly. Annan state? For more than 3 years, Annan state has long proved that they have lost control of Tian'an. All they can do is protest. We are the most powerful country in the world. I don't think we can't withstand a little pressure. If they protest, let them be. Chen Fangqing said disapprovingly. The problem is that things are not that bad now. There are still other ways to solve the problem. Ji Wenzhang smiled and calmly corrected the direction of the meeting. Before I came here, I had received the report from Wang Zhaojian, the vice commander of the Freedom Corps. Li Tianlan has arrived in Tunan City. He asked Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps, to send troops to recapture Tian'an, but Ning Ziyuan refused. He not only reported this matter to me, but also to Minister Dongqing, right? I want to ask, at this time, Ning Ziyuan has lost Tian'an, but he refuses to send troops. What does he, the commander of the Freedom Corps, want to do? Does he really want to be free? Ji Wenzhang's voice was very light, but as he spoke, his words became heavier and heavier. In the end, it could almost be said to be harsh. Dongqing Wudi was stunned. He looked cold and did not speak. Is there such a thing? Chen Fangqing was stunned. Looking at Dongqing Wudi, he narrowed his eyes and said, Minister, what's going on? It's a little sudden, and I just received the report before the meeting. I haven't communicated with Comrade Ziyuan yet. You should know Ziyuan better. He has a calm character. It's not difficult to understand that he didn't act rashly when Tunan City just fell. After the meeting, I'll ask him the specific reason. Dongqing Wudi said flatly. He was the executive minister of the army headquarters, and it could be said that he was Ning Ziyuan's immediate superior. If he insisted on blocking this matter, no one could really find a good reason. Ji Wenzhang smiled, and there was some sarcasm in his eyes. Of course I understand Comrade Ziyuan's calmness, but calmness doesn't mean cowardice. Now the Freedom Corps hasn't sent troops, but His Highness Li Tianlan is still fighting in Tunan City. Now it's Emperor Dong's palace that is fighting with the Burning Legion, only Emperor Dong's palace. When they need support, what is the Freedom Corps doing? Where is Ning Ziyuan? If they don't send troops under such circumstances, what's the point of the existence of the Freedom Corps? Chen Fangqing's face darkened. Gu Xingyun's expression suddenly changed. Only Emperor Dong's palace? He suddenly turned his head and looked at Ji Wenzhang. Ji Wenzhang smiled and didn't speak, but the direction of the meeting changed again as he spoke. Li Huaqing frowned and didn't say anything. Gu Xingyun's face was cloudy and he almost lost his composure. At that moment, he was really thinking about the problem after Emperor Dong's palace captured Tunan. Kunlun City wanted to capture Tunan, and then make Tian'an its own base camp. If Emperor Dong's palace did this, Gu Xingyun didn't expect Li Tianlan to give up the control of Tian'an. If he really did this, Emperor Dong's palace would really have a foundation. At the thought of this possibility, he couldn't help but panic. But after thinking about the strength of the Burning Legion and Ramelin, he finally forced himself to calm down. Report. A loud voice suddenly sounded outside the meeting room. Everyone subconsciously froze for a moment. But Dongqing Wudi seemed to have been waiting for this report. He immediately said in a deep voice, "Come in." The door of the meeting room was pushed open. General Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, walked into the meeting room and gave a standard military salute to the directors in the meeting room. Report, the war in Tunan City is over. The whole room was silent. No one seemed to have come back to their senses. The hard teacup turned into powder in Gu Xingyun's hand. The tea flowed, and Gu Xingyun's face was livid. He stared at Bai Qingzhao. What do you mean the war is over? How is Tunan? His voice was obviously trembling. Emperor Dong's palace successfully defeated the Burning Legion, and His Highness Li Tianlan took back Tunan City. Bai Qingzhao laughed with undisguised arrogance and complacency. That's impossible. Gu Xingyun's face instantly became distorted. He suddenly stood up, and his eyes were a little ferocious. But his gaffe was covered by the shock of the whole room. Li Huaqing also stood up, a little lost. What the hell is going on? Qingzhao, do you have any specific information? When the news of Tunan's fall came, it was already midnight. Even if Li Tianlan left as soon as possible, it should be morning when he arrived in Tianan. Now the morning was not over, and Tunan had already been taken back? Their meeting on how to take back Tianan was not over yet, but the war in Tunan was already over. Was Zhongzhou State too slow? Or was Li Tianlan too fast? The signal in Tianan is a little bad, and the picture is still being transmitted. But we have got in touch with His Highness Li Tianlan. He defeated Ramelin, and the Burning Legion has now retreated. His Highness is arranging people to kill them. Tunan City is already under the control of Emperor Dong's palace. Chen Fangqing's heart sank. Gu Xingyun's heart also sank. How was it possible? How did Li Tianlan do it? People were not surprised that he could defeat Ramelin. Even Ramelin himself would not be surprised. Li Tianlan's strength was obvious to all. Now, with his growth, Li Tianlan had indeed stood at the peak in the dark world of the new era. The reason why Ramelin dared to challenge Li Tianlan was not because of his personal strength, but because of the comprehensive strength of the Burning Legion and the 3 military bases near Tunan City. With these, the Burning Legion was in an invincible position in the face of Emperor Dong's palace, which did not have many people. He had defeated Ramelin, but the Burning Legion's elites and 3 military bases were all for naught. It's impossible. How could he do this? 3 bases and nearly 10,000 elites of the Burning Legion. How could he win? Gu Xingyun's face was extremely twisted and ferocious. He did not notice that when he said this, the other counselors were stiff. Even they did not know that there were nearly 10,000 elites of the Burning Legion in Tunan City. How did Gu Xingyun know? But Gu Xingyun, who was in a mess, obviously did not notice this. Tunan City was a key step in his plan, which was related to the future of Kunlun City. Now, Li Tianlan had taken the fruit. He was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. We need to know more about the specific situation. But according to the simple news, there were 10 lurkers and a large number of airborne soldiers on the battlefield in Tunan City, and even electromagnetic weapons. They helped His Highness control the 3 bases and the ordinary elites of the Burning Legion, Bai Qingzhao said calmly. Gu Xingyun's brain was buzzing, and he could hardly stand. Lurkers. There were 10 F*King lurkers. With this reason, it really did not matter whether there were other reasons or not. Not only Gu Xingyun. Even Ji Wenzhang and Wan Qingyun looked a little gloomy, because they had already seen the next direction of the meeting. Sure enough, Chen Fangqing was silent for a while and suddenly said, "What's the current movement of the Burning Legion?" "They're retreating. They're hundreds of miles away from Tunan City. Not long ago, they were raided by the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Daybreak, an expert of the Invincible Realm, personally took action, but he was seriously injured. At present, the Burning Legion has successfully escaped, and Ramelin was rescued." Bai Qingzhao reported with a serious face. The Burning Legion shouldn't have come to Tianan. Chen Fangqing snorted coldly. "Want to leave? Can you?" He glanced at Li Huaqing and said calmly, "I stick to my original plan, but the Black Dragon Corps may not be needed. Let Emperor Dong's palace chase the Burning Legion, let the Divine Martial Corps attack Sonk and Landka, and completely defeat the Burning Legion. In the land of Asia, no force that dares to target Zhongzhou State is allowed to exist." Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and glanced at the gloomy expressions of Wan Qingyun and Ji Wenzhang. He smiled and said calmly, "I agree." Chapter 712. At noon, the dispute in Tunan City finally came to an end. It was supposed to be a quiet scene in the plan, but now it was very lively. According to Li Tianlan's plan, The operation involving only hundreds of people from Emperor Dong's palace was only on the scale of hundreds of people. If they could win, it would probably be a mess. It would be a very difficult test to disperse these people in Tunan City and the 3 military bases, and it would also be troublesome to deal with the follow-up. But now it was different. More than 2,000 paratroopers did not sound like a lot, but when it came down to it, these people could be of great use in battles and finishing up the aftermath. With the return of the incognito, the whole of Tunan gradually became lively. 10 concealers parked on a grassland on the outskirts of Tunan City. The silver superalloy body reflected the cold luster in the sun, looking proud and awe-inspiring. Li Dunlan sat not far away, looking at the 10 big toys that changed the whole situation. He narrowed his eyes and no one knew what he was thinking. The members of the Angel Holy War were doing post-battle maintenance for the concealers. Number 1 stood respectfully beside Li Tianlan and said nothing. This was enough to show the sincerity of the new stream in supporting Li Tianlan. 10 concealers and 4 transport planes were well-deserved gifts. For Emperor Dong's palace, which was in urgent need of manpower, more than 2,000 paratroopers were priceless treasures. But most importantly, the new stream didn't leave any high-level officials for Li Tianlan. It was full of sincerity and no one could find fault with it. If the high-level members of the new stream joined Emperor Dong's palace, then all the forces of the new stream on the battlefield today would be handed over by Li Tianlan to the high-level members of the new stream. They might be loyal to the new stream, but in this way, it meant that the new stream had penetrated into Emperor Dong's palace. Now that there were no high-level members, these people would be completely loyal to Li Tianlan. As time went by, everyone would completely become Li Tianlan's direct force. How many forces like the Angel Holy War does the new stream have? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. The corner of number 1's mouth twitched. He said respectfully, strictly speaking, the Angel Crusade is a flight squadron, but it's more than that. According to the military establishment of Zhongzhou State, it can be regarded as an armed helicopter squadron plus an airborne corps. 10 concealers, 4 transport planes, and more than 2,000 airborne soldiers can all be regarded as members of the Angel Crusade. Such a force, even in the new stream, is under the direct leadership of Her Highness the Saintess and His Highness the Pope. What do you mean? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. Although number 1's words were euphemistic, it had fully explained the importance of Saint War Angels in the new stream. Such importance was even more important than he had expected. Yes. Number 1 said calmly, even in the new stream, the Holy War of Angels is one of the most important forces. As far as the organized armed forces are concerned, there is no one more powerful than the Holy War of Angels in the new stream. The Holy War of Angels is the only one. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and looked at the lurkers under the sun again. The fact was surprising, but it was also normal. Number 1's strength was not outstanding, he had just passed the fire-flaming realm. The other members of the flight squad were all in the ice-condensing realm. Their combat strength was low, but in terms of professional quality, they were the top pilots, or in other words, the top modern warriors. Not only helicopters, but also fighter planes and transport planes. Number 1 even said that they had received training on all kinds of ships and submarines. They could familiarize themselves with all kinds of sea, land, and air transportation vehicles in the shortest time. No matter how weak their individual strength was, they were the top talents in all the major forces. It was not easy for the new stream to train 10 of them. If they could have a second force like the Holy War of Angels, the new stream would not have hidden its strength in Southeast Asia. But if the Holy War of Angels was the only one in the new stream, why would they be sent to help Li Tianlan on this occasion? Why would they even send the entire new stream to him? Li Tianlan had seen those who helped before, but this kind of sincerity with all their assets was very strange to Li Tianlan. What's the name of the saintess of the new stream? Have you seen her? Li Tianlan asked. Number 1 was still respectful. For him, now that he had joined Emperor Dong's palace, the new stream was already a thing of the past. He could still tell this kind of thing apart. But when it came to the saintess, even though number 1 was very calm, there was still a touch of fanaticism in his eyes. The saintess has no name. He said softly, the saintess is indeed the saintess. I had the honor to see her once, from a long distance. Her Highness the saintess, the most perfect goddess, is nothing more than this. The most perfect goddess. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly trembled a little. A sound came from the communicator of number 1. He listened carefully for a while, looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "Your Highness, the battle casualties are out." "Say it." Li Tianlan didn't pay attention to it and said casually. In this battle, a total of 2,700 paratroopers successfully landed in Tiannan. 400 died and 200 were injured. At present, including the wounded, there are about 2,200 people who can go back to the battle. Number 1 reported. Li Tianlan was a little surprised. This kind of battle casualties was much lower than he expected. The first batch of paratroopers were just ordinary fanatics of the new stream. In other words, they were the cannon fodder to cover the later paratroopers. The second batch of paratroopers were the real elites. That was to say, in this battle, except for the cannon fodder who died in the battle, the real elites had almost no loss. He had seen the level of the Burning Legion. The elites of the Burning Legion seemed to be defenseless in his hands, but on the battlefield, they were powerful enough to destroy everything. They dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Thunderbolt Battalion. The combat capability of the Burning Legion was not to be trifled with. In this battle, even with the cover of the aerial attack of the lurkers and the ground attack of the elites of Emperor Dong's palace, the paratroopers could still cause such casualties, which was enough to show that their quality was better than Li Tianlan expected. If the loyalty of this group of people could be guaranteed, they would become the most trustworthy cornerstone of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan nodded and said, "Count the dead and I will arrange for people to pay the pension to their families in a short time. Number 1, you take care of this matter." Number 1 nodded calmly. His eyes followed Li Tianlan's gaze and fell on the 10 lurkers. He said softly, "Your Highness, do you have any idea about the empty city transport planes?" The lurkers were very small, so it was very convenient for them to land. A lawn was enough. But the 4 empty city transport planes were real behemoths. A lawn was not enough for them to take off and land. They needed a tailor-made runway and professional command for their takeoff and landing. This kind of bulky big guys was not very cost-effective for the newly developed Emperor Dong's palace. At least, it was far less practical than the lurkers. The only 2 points were that the 4 empty city transport planes were manned transport planes. If there was a real large-scale war, such transport planes were basically useless. But in a small-scale war, the manned transport planes could be regarded as strategic killing machines. But such a value was also much lower than that of the lurkers. Most importantly, they were packaged together with the lurkers by the new stream and sent to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan had to accept them. At this time, the whole world was focusing on the conflict between the Burning Legion in Tiannan and Emperor Dong's palace. Once the transport planes returned to the new stream, the hidden strength of the new stream would be almost exposed. But the problem was that there was no airport in Tiannan for the empty city transport planes to land. So now the 4 empty city transport planes were still invisible, carefully avoiding the detection signals of various countries and flying over Tiannan. There is no place in Tiannan to leave these 4 transport planes. Li Tianlan shook his head and said slowly, "Let's go to Eastern Europe." Eastern Europe? No. One looked dull. Reki City. Li Tianlan nodded. The Snowdance Corps would be stationed in Reki City in the future. If there were no accidents, there should not be a change of defense. With careful operation, the Snowdance Corps would still be Li Tianlan's team in the future. And with the strength of Wulan State, it would not be a problem to eat 4 transport planes. The key was that the Wang family of Beihai had taken over Snow Country, and the Li family had taken over the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. In the future, there would inevitably be small-scale conflicts, and the manned transport planes would come in handy. But it's too far. One was stunned. Tiannan was still south of the border of Zhongzhou State. From here to Eastern Europe, they had to fly all the way north, cross the entire border of Zhongzhou State, pass through Snow Country, and reach Reki City. Such a journey was more than 10,000 miles. The transport planes could not reach such a distance at all. I'll tell Xianxia State about the distance and let them resupply in time and space. At present, this is the only way. Li Tianlan said. One nodded with a wry smile and began to give orders. He muttered, "It seems that the airborne soldiers of the Saint War Angels will become infantry in the future." Li Tianlan smiled and looked back at Tunan City. He had begun to think about the future of Emperor Dong's palace. This seemed to be the first time that he had thought so carefully about the future of Emperor Dong's palace, the future of the Li family, and his own future. Because the old man who would always hold up the sky for him in the dark had left. Next, he could only rely on himself. The phone suddenly rang. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and glanced at it. It was a number from Yuzhou. He narrowed his eyes, pressed the answer button, and said hello. Marshal Li Tianlan? A steady voice sounded on the phone. It was the voice of General Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters of Xianxia State. The wording was very formal. Li Tianlan immediately realized that the occasion was unusual. He nodded and said calmly, "Hello, Deputy Secretary General." "Marshal Li, what's the situation in Tunan?" Bai Qingzhao's voice was obviously concerned. "I'm currently in the conference room in the Hidden Dragon Sea. Xianxia State is holding a high-level meeting. We've got some information. At present, the parliament is very concerned about the situation in Tianan. Marshal Li, can you tell us about it?" Li Tianlan's eyes flickered and he said seriously, "The war is over. The Burning Legion has officially left Tunan City. Emperor Dong's palace has taken over everything in Tunan City. However, the civilian casualties in Tunan City are very serious. The specific number is still being calculated. In the military base, some armaments were also damaged. In addition, Mayor Li of Tunan City was executed by the Burning Legion. I want to make a self-criticism to the parliament. I didn't keep Ramelun, which betrayed the trust of the parliament. It's not your fault, Marshal Li." Finally hearing the clear news, Bai Qingzhao breathed a sigh of relief. He stood in the conference room of the parliament and looked at the giants in the parliament. Hearing Li Tianlan's self-criticism and even his request for punishment, Dong Qingwudi, the standing minister of the army headquarters, was the first to speak. "You handled this matter very well and saved a lot of losses for Xianxia State. In fact, we're glad that you chose to stabilize the situation in Tianan first. It turns out that the Burning Legion still has a trump card. In the process of retreat, the Burning Legion, which suffered heavy losses, was attacked by the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Daybreak, an expert of the Invincible Realm, personally took action, but failed. An expert at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm from the Purgatory of Heaven Capital died in battle, and Daybreak was assassinated. He was seriously injured and might even die. So your decision was right. Since you've won, there's no need to take risks." Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. There were experts lurking in the Burning Legion? But why didn't they attack him? Even with his perception, he didn't notice any danger around him when fighting with Ramelun. What if the other party could really hide from his perception and suddenly attack him in the battle? Daybreak was even at risk of dying, which was enough to prove how terrible the assassins lurking in the Burning Legion were. The most important thing was that an expert at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm from the Purgatory of Heaven Capital died in battle. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said in a low voice, "Minister, who was the expert that the Purgatory of Heaven Capital lost?" "The code name is Grey Dark. We're not familiar with him." Dong Qingwudi said slowly. Li Tianlan thought about it. He was not familiar with this code name, and he wasn't even sure if the other party was an old man from the Li family. "Marshal Li, you've worked hard in this battle. We'll provide assistance to Tunan City as soon as possible. If you need anything, you can also ask." A strange voice sounded on the phone. "I'm Chen Fangqing. Xianxia State will try its best to meet your requirements." Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, revealing a sneer. "Thank you for your concern, Prime Minister," he said blandly, "but at present Emperor Dong's palace can still cope with it and doesn't need any support. We'll restore the order in Tunan City as soon as possible and protect the stability of Tunan City for Xianxia State." "Protect Tunan for Xianxia State." After all, Li Tianlan was not a veteran in politics. He didn't bother to hide his words and directly stated his intention. This sentence was equivalent to telling all the directors of Zhongzhou State that from now on, everything in Tunan, including the 3 military bases, would belong to Emperor Dong's palace. We don't doubt Marshal Li's strength, but Marshal Li seems to have forgotten that Tunan City belongs to the Freedom Corps. I wonder when Marshal Li plans to return it? A gloomy voice rang out, and it was laced with some anger. Li Tianlan naturally couldn't forget this voice, but he asked knowingly, "Who's talking?" The voice gave a muffled snort. "I'm Gu Xingyun." Li Tianlan smiled. "I thought it was the commander of the Freedom Corps who spoke. Your Highness Gu Xingyun, Commander Ning of the Freedom Corps didn't say when I'll return Tunan City. From what position do you ask me this question? Li Tianlan, don't be too domineering. The Freedom Corps belongs to Zhongzhou State, and Tianan naturally belongs to Zhongzhou State. It doesn't belong to anyone." Gu Xingyun said coldly. "Really?" Li Tianlan directly interrupted him. "Tunan belongs to Zhongzhou State? I agree with this matter, but who else in the world agrees? And since it belongs to Zhongzhou State, then I want to ask, when the Burning Corps attacked Tunan, as the hidden guardian force of Zhongzhou State, as the special warfare center of Zhongzhou State, what was Kunlun City doing in the hours after the incident? You claim to be the war god of Zhongzhou State. Your Highness Gu Xingyun, what were you doing? Was it a dereliction of duty of Kunlun City this time? Was it a dereliction of duty of you, Gu Xingyun?" Everyone glanced at Gu Xingyun, as if they didn't expect Li Tianlan's words to be so sharp. In everyone's impression, Li Tianlan seemed to have always been silent, and it could even be said that he was not good at talking. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth and snorted. Li Tianlan was already a little impatient. "As for the problem of Tunan City, I will communicate with Commander Ning Ziyuan in the near future. We will also negotiate the ownership of Tunan City. We all think that Tianan will belong to Zhongzhou State in the future, but it also means that Tianan has no clear ownership at present. If I conquer Tianan, I naturally have the right to occupy it. But don't forget, Emperor Dong's palace also belongs to Zhongzhou State. We will reach an agreement with the Freedom Corps as soon as possible. In this case, the communication should be done as soon as possible. Marshal Li, you should communicate more with the parliament. At present, we still have a lot of things to discuss with you. Since Tunan City is temporarily stabilized, why don't you go back to Yuzhou first? We will adjourn for the time being. The meeting will continue when you come over. In addition, Comrade Ning Ziyuan also has some questions to explain. You can come together and talk about the problem of Tunan on the way." Li Huaqing said with a smile. Li Tianlan slightly hesitated, then nodded and said, "Okay. The Freedom Corps will send a military plane to pick you up. See you later," Li Huaqing said. Li Tianlan answered and hung up the phone. He stood where he was and was silent for a long time. If there were no accidents, many controversial things should be settled when he returned to Yuzhou this time. For example, he destroyed the entire Tang family. For example, the storm he caused in Beihai province. For example, his rank of marshal. Another example was his status in Reki City and the follow-up of the Snowdance Corps. Of course, there were a series of problems in Tianan and the ownership of Tunan City, as well as how much support the new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace would get from Zhongzhou State. There were even some problems of Samsara Palace. Li Huaqing was right. Now he and the parliament of Zhongzhou State did have a lot to communicate. And after this communication, his focus would also shift to Tianan. He would use the wealth brought by the 5 Eastern European countries to develop his own foundation in Tianan with peace of mind. Then there might be a long period of peace. Li Tianlan thought silently until Ning Qianxing's voice sounded behind him. "Who called just now?" "Secretary General Bai, who is currently in the conference room of the Hidden Dragon Sea. He called me," Li Tianlan said casually. "What did he say?" Ning Qianxing's eyes became serious. At this time, Zhongzhou State held a high-level meeting, and the content of the discussion was self-evident. "It's not clear on the phone. I'm going to Yuzhou. There are always some things to solve. Well, this time Uncle Ning will go with me. He coughed and looked at Ning Qianqing. I guess Uncle Ning will be punished this time. It was true. No matter how free Ning Ziyuan and the Freedom Corps were in Tianan, they were still the power of Zhongzhou State. In any case, this time Li Tianlan took down Tunin alone, and the Freedom Corps didn't take any action from beginning to end. No matter how Ning Ziyuan explained, he couldn't change the fact. Once Tunin belonged to Emperor Dong's palace, the whole Zhongzhou State would be very passive. Dongqing Wudi might not say anything, but from the standpoint of an ally, Li Huaqing might not want to see Emperor Dong's palace expand too quickly. As for the Prince Group, Special Warfare Group, and even the Wang family of Beihai, they certainly didn't want to see this scene. So Ning Ziyuan's trip to Yuzhou wouldn't be too comfortable. The powerhouses in the parliament couldn't do anything to Li Tianlan, but they could teach Ning Ziyuan a lesson. Even if they vented their anger, Ning Ziyuan would at least be given a serious warning or a major demerit. But that was the situation, and it couldn't be too bad. As long as Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan were in Tianan, it was unlikely that the highest officer of the Freedom Corps would be replaced by someone else. Whether it was the Prince Group, Special Warfare Group, or the Wang family of Beihai, they wouldn't send their own people to take this position. That wasn't profit, but death. Did they really think that Li Tianlan didn't dare to kill people? I guess it'll be a major demerit at most. It won't be more serious. Ning Qianqing shook his head. As for feeling bad, he won't feel bad. His major demerit will change the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace. I'm afraid he'll laugh when he makes a review in the parliament. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go." The sound of a helicopter came from the horizon. A helicopter flew over from afar and slowly landed near the hiding place. Li Tianlan walked into the cabin and suddenly froze. Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps, was sitting in the cabin and looking at him with a smile. "Uncle Ning, why are you here?" Li Tianlan reached out his hand and shook hands with him. He thought the helicopter would pick him up first, and then pick up Ning Ziyuan to return to Yuzhou. He didn't expect Ning Ziyuan to come in person. The Freedom Corps is noisy and in a mess now, so I came here for peace and quiet. Ning Ziyuan said with a smile, and I heard that there are hiding places in Tunin City. I have to come and have a look and see the current situation in Tunin City. He looked down as he said this. The delicate and extremely dangerous hiding place was parked on the grass at this time, looking extremely quiet. Ning Ziyuan's eyes were a little surprised. "Your Highness, I really don't understand this." He shook his head as if he couldn't believe it. "This is the core armament of Star State. Where did you get it? And there are 10 of them." "The last asset of the Samsara Palace," Li Tianlan said with a smile. After a quick hesitation, he still didn't choose to tell Ning Ziyuan about the news stream. It was not a matter of distrust, but it was obvious that the fewer people knew about the news stream, the better. After all, the news stream had a certain influence in Zhongzhou State. If he kept this trump card, it might play a greater role in the future. Besides, putting a religion together with so many advanced armaments would also arouse the vigilance of others. So, he simply said it was the Samsara Palace, which would be easier to accept. Ning Ziyuan's eyes were a little stern. He didn't doubt that these hiding places were from the Samsara Palace. But at present, the Samsara Palace was merging into Emperor Dong's palace faster and faster. First it was the saints, then the hiding places. Who knew what else would happen next? With these, the air domain of Tianan will basically belong to Emperor Dong's palace in the future. Ning Ziyuan sighed with emotion. There was no doubt that the hiding places had become the most powerful weapon besides Li Tianlan. Sometimes, they were even more powerful than Li Tianlan. There was no military airport in Tianan, and when Zhongzhou State and Annan State restrained each other, it was impossible for Annan State's fighter planes to enter the airspace of Tianan. Annan State might send armed helicopters to the Burning Legion, but Annan State was a small place. It was easy to know the level of their armaments. Compared with the hiding places, the helicopters in service in Annan State were like an old car and a Ferrari. They couldn't pose any threat to the hiding places. As long as the hiding places were still there, Annan State might not have a large-scale war like the invasion of the Burning Legion for a long time. because they couldn't afford to fight. Once the hiding places took off, each one was a real-life harvester. The more people there were, the more lethal they were. In the absence of large-scale conflicts, Emperor Dong's palace could handle some small-scale disputes more easily. Not to mention Li Tianlan's almost invincible strength. Even in Emperor Dong's palace, other experts were not to be trifled with. At least for now, in terms of internal experts, Emperor Dong's palace might not be as good as other superpowers, but in terms of quality, it was not bad. After all, in the current Emperor Dong's palace, there was not only Li Tianlan, but also Saint of the Invincible Realm. In addition, he was the young governor of Sai City. The 4 great sword masters of Mount Shu, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, the Black Tortoise squad of Xianxia State stationed at the border all year round, the graduates of the 2 academies, this kind of power represented an absolutely perfect future. More than that, this is only part of it. Li Tianlan smiled. There's more. Ning Ziyuan raised his eyebrows and was a little surprised. He seemed to think of something and frowned. Your Highness, do you mean the transport plane? In the current situation in Tianan, the transport plane is difficult to play a role. Apart from other things, its takeoff and landing is a big problem. Not the transport plane. Li Tianlan shook his head. I'm going to send the transport plane to Reki City. I'm talking about the hiding place. Ning Ziyuan's face suddenly changed. The hiding place. They were both 3rd-generation stealth-armed helicopters. The hiding place came from Star State, while the hiding place came from Zhongzhou State. In fact, in international evaluation, the performance of the hiding place had always been slightly better than the hiding place. The advantages of the hiding place were its endurance and relative flexibility. But the advantage of the hiding place was that it had a better stealth system than the hiding place. When the stealth system was good enough, endurance and flexibility were not too important. Zhongzhou State agreed to support Li Tianlan's hiding place now? How was that possible? Ning Ziyuan thought for a moment, and his heart suddenly moved. He shouted, "The Wang family of Beihai." Li Tianlan laughed. Yes, the Wang family of Beihai. Ning Ziyuan sighed slightly. It seemed that many people did not notice that when Li Tianlan went to Beihai province, he had to explain. So far, there was no news about how important this explanation was and what price the Wang family of Beihai would pay. Obviously, the hiding place was the explanation that the Wang family of Beihai gave to Li Tianlan, or even just a part of the explanation. How many? Ning Ziyuan asked. A flying team, 5. Li Tianlan said, in addition, they will try to build a military airport for me in Tianan. I don't think about a large airport for the time being, but an airport that can support the takeoff and landing of small fighter jets should be no problem. Ning Ziyuan gasped and said dryly, so once the airport is built, what the Wang family of Beihai promised you will be more than just the hiding place, right? Yes, there are about 10 stingers, but they can't be delivered until 3 years later. Li Tianlan said. Ning Ziyuan shook his head with a bitter smile. 3 years sounded far away, but it took a long time to build a military airport. Once the airport was built, some of the stingers must be delivered first. Stingers were carrier-based aircraft, fast, powerful and small. Although there was no aircraft carrier in Tianan, Tianan itself was not big, and the advantages of carrier-based aircraft could be fully exerted. Hiding place, lurking place, and stingers. Tonan. New city plan. Emperor Dong's palace. Ning Ziyuan was suddenly shocked. He suddenly realized that although Zhongzhou State had made a plan to let Emperor Dong's palace absorb the Freedom Corps, this plan might be faster than he thought. Now Emperor Dong's palace already had the prototype of a big force. And 3 years later, with the establishment of the military airport and the delivery of stingers, what would it be like? The most important thing was, once Li Tianlan entered the Invincible Realm in 3 years, how terrifying would he be? And 3 years later, it was the time for the new graduates of the 2 academies of Zhongzhou State to graduate. The group of people around Li Tianlan would also grow up. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace might be very mature. A strong leader, sufficient armaments, rich talent echelon, and top experts. 3 years. In 3 years at most, Emperor Dong's palace might have the prototype of a super force. This was a speed that was enough to stun everyone. But at this time, in Ning Ziyuan's view, it was completely reasonable. Ning Ziyuan took a deep breath, feeling a little complicated and a little emotional. Uncle Ning, I plan to use Tunan City as the core of the new city plan. What do you think? Li Tianlan asked. This sentence was undoubtedly telling Ning Ziyuan that he wanted Tunan City. Very good, the foundation of Tunan City is good, but since it is a new city plan, the name should be changed. What do you plan to name the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace in the future? Such a big city, and you want to call it Emperor Dong's palace? Ning Ziyuan asked. No. Li Tianlan shook his head. Looking at the outline of Tunan City that was getting farther and farther below, he said, this place will be called Xianyuan City from now on. He turned to look at Ning Ziyuan and said softly, I hope Xianxia can be the first mayor of Xianyuan City. Chapter 7:13. Ning Ziyuan looked at Li Tianlan quietly for a long time. Xianyuan City. With this title alone, Li Tianlan's intention had been clearly conveyed. In Gu Xingyun's eyes, this was the real ambition of a wolf. When the Li family was in charge of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, the special warfare center of Zhongzhou State was Zhuanyuantai, which later became Kunlun City. Now that Li Tianlan had established Xianyuan City in Tianan, his intention of opposing Kunlun City with tit for tat was extremely obvious. This was simply a violation of Kunlun City's bottom line. However, Ning Ziyuan had to admit that Tianan was indeed a good place. Judging from the current situation that Zhongzhou State was facing, if the hub of the special warfare system was really going to be transferred, it was the most appropriate and most deterrent to build the new hub in Tianan. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, Zhongzhou State firmly controlled the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. The Wang family of Beihai developed in Snow Country. Snow Country, the hegemon, had greatly reduced its deterrent to Zhongzhou State. Although they had to guard against East Island on the doorstep of Zhongzhou State, the purgatory of Heaven Capital had taken root in East Island. Even if Li Kuangtu returned to Zhongzhou State, the forces of the purgatory of Heaven Capital could not be completely eliminated. In fact, the reason why Zhongzhou State wanted Li Kuangtu to return to Zhongzhou State was also to completely take over the right to speak in the dark world of East Island with the power of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Even if this thing couldn't become a reality for the time being, at least it was certain that in the game between Zhongzhou State and East Island, because of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, Zhongzhou State had taken the initiative. If it controlled the underground world of East Island, it would be put on the agenda by Zhongzhou State sooner or later. In this way, there were many small countries and the chaotic situation in Southeast Asia would become the primary concern of Zhongzhou State. If Xianyuan City really had a strong deterrent force in the future, it would be enough to change the situation in Southeast Asia according to the will of Zhongzhou State if it was built in Tianan. Tianan was indeed a good place. The best thing was that the establishment of Xianyuan City showed Li Tianlan's ambition. But today, Li Tianlan and Xianyuan City were not the special warfare center of Zhongzhou State. If Zhongzhou State settled here in advance, it could avoid the pressure of international public opinion to the greatest extent. In this way, the possibility of Zhongzhou State passing Li Tianlan's request was greatly increased. Gu Xingyun might oppose the establishment of Xianyuan City with all his might. Chen Fangqing, the leader of the Prince Group, might not oppose it. If Kunlun City had a lot of tricks in the dark in recent years because of its position, then the Prince Group, which had participated in the Li family's treason case, was undoubtedly more upright. As for Prime Minister Chen Fangqing, according to Ning Ziyuan's understanding of him, no matter what his position was, he was unlikely to oppose things that were good for Zhongzhou State. He was the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. The second was the leader of the Prince Group. He was a true politician who knew when to fight, when to compromise, and when to give support. In the face of something that was beneficial to the entire Zhongzhou State, Chen Fangqing could not oppose it, and he would not even hesitate. Even if it meant that he would have to face pressure from the Prince Group after he agreed. However, Chen Fangqing never went against his principles. This may be one of the reasons why Chen Fangqing has always been respected by the senior executives of major groups even though he is the leader of the prince group. Such a prime minister was a good thing, even a blessing for Zhongzhou state. Therefore, Li Tianlan proposed to build Xianyuan city as soon as he conquered Tunnan city. It seemed abrupt, but in fact, it was a mature idea with a great possibility of being adopted. However, what Ning Ziyuan did not expect was that Li Tianlan wanted his son, Ning Qianqing, to be the first mayor of Tunnan city. Qianqing. Ning Ziyuan hesitated, unable to make a decision for a moment. Qianqing will be fine. Li Tianlan smiled. His voice was calm and confident. He has enough ability to be a good mayor. Ability? I'm worried about his age. Ning Ziyuan shook his head with a wry smile. He had never doubted his son's ability, just as Li Tianlan did not doubt Ning Qianqing's ability. Ning Qianqing's character was extremely steady and calm, but at the same time, he was energetic, open-minded, and had a deep mind. He could be said to be a commander with a big picture. If he was not capable, he would not have been valued by Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, in the border control corps when he and Ning Ziyuan had no contact. However, Ning Qianqing's talent was relatively mediocre when it came to martial arts. Ning Qianqing was now an expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm at the age of 28. His realm was not low, and he could be regarded as a genius. However, when it came to martial arts, in Li Tianlan's eyes, it was inevitable that he was not strong enough. Since he entered the secular world, Li Beidian and Ning Qianqing were the first brothers to stand by his side. The former seemed to be entrusted by Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master, but Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master, also secretly gave him support. The latter was undoubtedly the force that Dongqing Wudi sent to his side. Li Tianlan was indebted to Mount Shu and the Dongqing clan, and he also cherished his friendship with Li Beidian and Ning Qianqing. Li Beidian was the great void sword master of Mount Shu. In the field of martial arts, he was top-notch in both talent and talent. Now, he looked a little weaker by Li Tianlan's side. That was because Li Baitian's realm progress was a little slow, but his foundation was extremely stable. Now, Li Beidian was only half a step away from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Once he took this half a step, the great void sword at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm would not be much weaker than most of the half-step invincible realm experts. Ning Qianqing was not strong enough, but Li Beidian did not have this problem at all. Unless there was a very serious accident, Li Beidian would definitely be able to enter the invincible realm within 10 years and become Li Tianlan's real right-hand man. Based on their relationship and the current position of Mount Shu, Li Beidian would be much more reliable than Lin Yuxian. As for Ning Qianqing, it was destined to be difficult for him to enter the invincible realm, or even impossible. His greatest value was not his own strength, but his rare leadership talent. Li Tianlan had originally considered Ning Qianqing's position in the future. At the beginning, Li Tianlan planned to hand over the future elite force of Emperor Dong's palace to Ning Qianqing and make him the real commander of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. But now with such a huge opportunity in Tunnan, Li Tianlan did not hesitate to push Ning Qianqing to the position of mayor. As for the age problem, Li Tianlan smiled indifferently and said disapprovingly, "Uncle Ning, don't forget that this is Tiannan." Ning Ziyuan was stunned, and his eyes lit up slightly. This was Tiannan. This was undoubtedly the most crucial sentence. It did not belong to Zhongzhou state. After taking Tunnan, this was Li Tianlan's own territory. It was entirely up to Li Tianlan to decide who would be the mayor. As for the age, it might be considered in Zhongzhou state. But in Tiannan, Zhongzhou state could not consider this aspect at all for the time being. This is an opportunity for Qianqing. Li Tianlan said softly, "It is also an opportunity for me and for Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace has developed to this point, and everything should be on the right track." He looked at Ning Ziyuan and said softly, "For example, setting up your own group." Ning Qianqing was suddenly shocked and even stood up directly. "Group?" he asked in reply. "Of course." Li Tianlan laughed and said, "With Qianqing as the core, a group that belongs to me. Uncle Ning, do you think this road is very familiar?" Li Tianlan had a good relationship with the academics now. According to the original promise, Li Tianlan was even a member of the academics now. However, Li Tianlan's growth was too fast, and the academics also sensibly regarded him as a future ally. In the past few years, the academic support for Li Tianlan could not be little. And not only the academics. As the son-in-law of the Dongsheng clan, the giant group now completely supported Li Tianlan, and it could even be said to support him at all costs. Such a sign was too obvious. The transfer of Zhou Yuanshan, the future leader of the giant group, to Lin In as the governor was the clearest signal. This kind of action even faintly showed that Li Tianlan was the future core of the giant group. But after all, that was only a possibility in the future. So people realized the support of the academics and the giant group for Li Tianlan, but it was difficult to see these things as Li Tianlan's foundation, because it was not his own power. No matter how close an ally was, it was different from a power that completely belonged to him. If it was not his own, it represented a variable. This was a truth that everyone could understand. If Emperor Dong's palace wanted to develop in the future, it must have its own power. Such power included wealth, status, territory, force, military power, and naturally, political power. For any big force, it was necessary to have its own political group. With Xianyuan City, Li Tianlan had put the establishment of his own group on the agenda. Such a path was more than just familiar. Ning Ziyuan shook his head with a wry smile. This was almost the path that the Wang family of Beihai had walked for hundreds of years. With a template, it would naturally go smoothly. The path of the Wang family of Beihai. Ning Ziyuan shook his head with emotion, reached out his hand to Li Tianlan, and said solemnly, "Thank you." Li Tianlan shook his head and said softly, "I should thank you, uncle." Ning Ziyuan shook his head with a smile. "I owe Senior Li, so I naturally have to pay it back. Your Highness, from now on, we are on the same side, so there is no need to say anything polite." He didn't think he deserved Li Tianlan's thanks, although he had to pay a lot in the future development of Emperor Dong's palace. But this was what he owed Li Honghe back then, and he had long been psychologically prepared to pay it back. The establishment of Xianyuan City this time meant that the Freedom Corps lost a city. Gu Xingyun would not let him go. Even if Chen Fangqing supported Li Tianlan, he did not mind giving him a serious punishment. And it could be foreseen that this was just the beginning. With the development of Emperor Dong's palace, the Freedom Corps was bound to make more concessions to Li Tianlan in the future. Although this was a plan of Zhongzhou state, it was actually not glorious. In a plan full of conspiracies and ambitions, as the executor, Ning Ziyuan was likely to have a bad end. Speaking of life and death, it was still too far away. But the best result was that Ning Ziyuan would certainly not have a good reputation. But the return that Li Tianlan gave him was equally generous. Ning Ziyuan, who had passed the age of knowing his destiny, did not want to pursue anything else. He only had one son. If Ning Qianxing could develop the Ning family and even let the family continue to prosper, Ning Ziyuan would die without regrets. There was no doubt about Li Tianlan's potential. A new group with Ning Qianxing as the core, a new group that belonged to the Heavenly Sun. As the core of the group, Ning Ziyuan was looking forward to what kind of glory he would have in the future. Of course. Li Tianlan smiled and said softly, "But uncle is wrong. This is not the old path of the Wang family of Beihai, or at least, not all of it. Snow country hundreds of years ago." Ning Ziyuan suddenly understood. His heart suddenly trembled, and he was a little excited. The current situation was indeed different from the beginning of the Wang family of Beihai. Furthermore, it was a very big difference. At that time, Snow Country was powerful and far stronger than it was now. As one of the most powerful hegemonic countries in the world, the Wang family of Beihai took Beihai from Snow Country, which was tantamount to snatching food from a tiger's mouth. And at that time, Zhongzhou state was not the most powerful country in the world. The Wang family of Beihai took the land from Snow Country and East Island, and then returned to Zhongzhou state. The process was full of ups and downs, and the whole process lasted for nearly 20 years. And it was under the awe of the two heavenly sons. The ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai, the heavenly sun. And the patriarch of Zhuanyuantai, who was no less than the heavenly sun, joined forces to make Beihai the youngest province of Zhongzhou State. And now, first of all, Annan State was not snow country. The two countries were like heaven and earth. And now Zhongzhou State had become the most powerful country with few rivals, which also meant that the return process was not too bumpy. What Emperor Dong's palace had to do next was very simple. It was to accelerate the development at all costs and enhance its strength. To speed up the process of returning to Zhongzhou State. Now Li Tianlan had Tunan City. Ning Qianqing was the mayor. And what would happen when Emperor Dong's palace took Ningbian or even the whole Tianan? The land of more than 30,000 square kilometers was the area of a small province. At that time, Ning Qianqing would naturally become the governor. Ning Qianqing was 28 years old this year, and the process of Emperor Dong's palace taking over Tianan was destined to not be long. 3 years? 5 years? At that time, Ning Qianqing was only in his early 30s. A governor in his early 30s. This had broken the record of Zhongzhou State. And as Tianan was included in the territory of Zhongzhou State, Ning Qianqing's identity would also change. He would become the speaker of Tianan province of Zhongzhou State and officially enter the high-rise buildings of Zhongzhou State. The return of the new land was naturally a big event that shocked the whole country. Even if Tianan was not as big as Beihai province because of its small area, the first speaker of the new province was bound to enter the parliament of Zhongzhou State and become one of the more than 20 MPs of Zhongzhou State. At that time, Ning Qianqing was about 35 years old. A 35-year-old MP of Zhongzhou State. This position was already enough to support the development of a new group. This was Li Tianlan's blueprint for the future and also his return to Ning Ziyuan. Such a return was so generous that it was even possible for Ning Qianqing at the age of 40 to become the youngest council member of Zhongzhou State since the founding of Zhongzhou State. And such a pattern was also very familiar. Just like the current Wang family of Beihai and the 7 sword-holding families of Beihai province. It could be said that from now on, the Ning family could already be regarded as the sword-holding family of Emperor Dong's palace. Such a prospect was worthy of Ning Ziyuan's solemn thanks. Ning Ziyuan was lost in thought, and his expression was full of undisguised fascination. We will succeed. Li Tianlan chuckled and said, at this point, there is no possibility of failure. Ning Ziyuan also laughed and felt somewhat gratified. Indeed, as Li Tianlan had said, Emperor Dong's palace had no possibility of failure at this stage. In this era, no one could stop the footsteps of Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan. His success was inevitable, and the only thing he needed was time. And only time. And Li Tianlan, who was only 22 years old this year, had the least lack of time. Li Tianlan's combat capability was terrible enough to make anyone afraid. However, the most frightening thing about him was his young age. This was the most frightening enemy. Anyway, Your Highness, I still want to thank you. Ning Ziyuan said softly. Li Tianlan waved his hand and said softly, Qianqing is my brother. No matter how high I stand in the future, there must always be people around me that I can completely trust. This position of mayor is my wedding gift to Qianqing. Ning Qianqing and Yu Qingyan had been together for more than 3 years. Both Yu Donglai and Ning Ziyuan were very satisfied with Ning Qianqing and Yu Qingyan. The two families had already planned for them to get married next year. This boy, Ning Ziyuan laughed and said, both career and love have been fruitful. Life is good. Li Tianlan smiled. At this moment he thought of Dongqing Rushi, who was in a coma, and Wang Yuetong, who was still in the Wang family of Beihai. He looked out of the window and stopped talking. It was nearly 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Li Tianlan and Ning Ziyuan officially arrived in Yuzhou. When the whole dark world was in chaos, without any pause, the two directly entered the Hidden Dragon Sea and appeared in the conference room of Zhongzhou State's parliament. The meeting began in the morning. Although the meeting was adjourned for a few hours, none of the council members left. No one had the time to eat either. Taking advantage of this time, the council quickly formed a document regarding Tianan and passed it to every member of the council. Then, it was passed again to the governor, requesting everyone to unify their thoughts and unite against the external threat. When Li Tianlan and Ning Ziyuan were brought to the conference room by the secretary, Li Huaqing was on the phone with Wu Jingmin, the vice prime minister of Zhongzhou State, who was in charge of the diplomatic work of Zhongzhou State. He asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to emphasize its position and announce Zhongzhou State's attitude to the outside world. Seeing Li Tianlan come in, Li Huaqing smiled and waved his hand, motioning him to sit down. Under everyone's gaze, Li Tianlan walked around the conference room and finally sat next to Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun's face twisted, and he couldn't help but move his body. Dongqing Wudi and Li Huaqing smiled at the same time. "Your Highness, long time no see." Glancing at Gu Xingyun, Li Tianlan greeted him with a chuckle, looking extremely affectionate. "I'd rather not see you." Gu Xingyun was expressionless. "Marshal Li, the farther away we are, the better." "That won't do." Li Tianlan shook his head and said in a faint voice, "Today's meeting is a little sensitive. I'm afraid that Your Highness will be very emotional. If I'm here, at least I can ensure that Your Highness won't be too impulsive." "Really?" Gu Xingyun glanced at him with a sneer. "I think I'll be more excited if you're here." "That won't happen." Li Tianlan shook his head solemnly and looked honest. "Although it's not the first time I've been here, it's the first time I've attended a meeting of the council. It's inevitable that a newcomer doesn't know the rules. And I'm in a bad mood now. Your Highness, you'd better be careful with what you say, or I'll do it." Gu Xingyun's face suddenly turned purplish red. Threat? This was a naked threat. This feeling was extremely weird. Such a scene was too bizarre. Gu Xingyun had been sitting in this conference room for more than 20 years, and he had never received such a threat. "Be careful with what you say, or I'll beat you." What was this? What was this? What the hell was this? Childish, boring, rogue, shameless. This was the highest place in Zhongzhou State, but Li Tianlan's words dragged it down to the level of a street fight. Gu Xingyun even felt that he was going crazy. The point was that Li Tianlan didn't lower his voice at all. Everyone present, including the secretary, could hear his threat. Gu Xingyun didn't even know what to do for a while. Should he fly into a rage? Li Tianlan was a newcomer, but his combat capability was there. In his current state of serious injury, he really couldn't stand Li Tianlan's torment. It was Li Tianlan's first time to attend this kind of meeting. If he really took action, as long as Gu Xingyun didn't die, Zhongzhou State would not care too much. After all, Tianan was too important to Zhongzhou State. That was to say, Li Tianlan could really take action. He could really take action. If he got angry now and asked Li Tianlan to press him down and beat him in the conference room, Gu Xingyun's dignity would really be discredited. And such a thing for a 22-year-old boy, he could really do it. He could really do it. But, should he just bear it? That would also be discredited. Perhaps everyone would think that he was afraid of Li Tianlan. The corners of Gu Xingyun's mouth kept twitching. A bloody sweetness came out of his throat, but he swallowed it down. Just one sentence. Just a sentence that couldn't be put in public, but it made Gu Xingyun in a dilemma, which was extremely shameful. Well, now is not the time to joke. Li Huaqing, who put down the phone, gave a dry cough. He wanted to be more serious, but when he glanced around, he found that almost all the counselors and even the secretary had an unbearable smile on their faces. The serious conference room suddenly became a little happy because of Li Tianlan's words. Indeed, it seemed that since the founding of the People's Republic, there had never been such a thing like, "Watch your mouth, or I'll beat you up," in this conference room. It could be heard as a joke. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, held back his laughter, and waved his hand. At this time, it was really not suitable for him to say anything more to Li Tianlan. He glanced around and suddenly fell on Ning Ziyuan. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes slightly and said calmly, "Comrade Ning Ziyuan, when Emperor Dong's palace was fighting in Tunan City, why didn't you organize the army to cooperate with the attack of Emperor Dong's palace? This efficiency makes the council very disappointed in you. Why are you so slow?" Dongqing Wudi glanced at Ning Ziyuan. Chen Fangqing, Gu Xingyun, Wan Qingyun. The counselors of the Prince Group, the Special Warfare Group, and the Wang family of Beihai frowned at the same time. Although Li Huaqing's words were an accusation, he set the tone as soon as he spoke. It was not that Ning Ziyuan did not fight back, nor did he deliberately delay. It was just that he was slow. He was a little slow to stop the counterattack. It was obvious that he was trying to protect Ning Ziyuan with this sentence. Because the Freedom Corps is in a mess now. Ning Ziyuan naturally also heard the meaning of protection in Li Huaqing's words. He smiled and slowly said, "This time, the Freedom Corps was raided by the Burning Legion and suffered heavy losses. Many defeated soldiers from Tunan City need to be dealt with. Moreover, it happened suddenly, and the people in the Corps are in a panic. I don't think it is suitable to fight back too quickly. We have to stabilize the situation in Ningbian first." Of course, from the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, the Freedom Corps did handle the situation improperly. For this, I want to apologize to His Highness Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan smiled and waved his hand. But I clearly heard that after the war broke out, the fighting intent within the Freedom Corps was very strong. Comrade Wang Zhaojian once expressed to you that he wanted to fight as soon as possible, but you refused. Wan Qingyun narrowed his eyes and stared at Ning Ziyuan, his voice cold. The Freedom Corps is under the responsibility of the Corps commander. Ning Ziyuan said calmly, "I know my army better than anyone else. A moment of passion can't decide anything. It can only cause greater losses. In that case, stability should be the first priority. And I believe in the fighting ability of His Highness Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace. It has been proved that Emperor Dong's palace did take Tunan City and beat back the Freedom Corps. But it was Marshal Li who took Tunan City. From the perspective of the Freedom Corps lost Tunan City. Commander Ning Ziyuan, you are responsible for this matter. And the ownership of Tunan City has now become very troublesome." Dongqing Wudi suddenly said. Ning Ziyuan's responsibility could not be avoided at all. This was something that everyone could predict, so Dongqing Wudi simply said it. He clearly pointed out that the ownership of Tunan City was very troublesome, which also meant that he admitted the possibility that Tunan City might belong to Li Tianlan. From this point of view, Dongqing Wudi had begun to speak for Li Tianlan. He could not wait. "It's not troublesome." Ning Ziyuan shook his head and said slowly, "On the way here, I have communicated with Marshal Li. Since we are all colleagues of Zhongzhou State, it is not a big deal whether Tunan City falls into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace or the Freedom Corps, as long as it is not in the hands of hostile forces." Gu Xingyun's heart suddenly trembled. He said furiously, "Ningzun, what do you mean?" "I mean, on behalf of the Freedom Corps, I am willing to hand over the defense of Tunan City to His Highness Li Tianlan. In the communication just now, His Highness Li Tianlan has promised that Emperor Dong's palace will stay in Tunan City in the future to help share the pressure of the Freedom Corps." Ning Ziyuan's voice was slow, but it was like a clap of thunder that rolled through the conference room. But this was just the beginning. Li Tianlan's voice had already sounded after Ning Ziyuan. "Yes, after I communicated with Commander Ning, we have always thought that the Burning Legion is very powerful. It is difficult to resist the attack of invincible realm experts with only the Freedom Corps. But Emperor Dong's palace and the Freedom Corps can cooperate. Tunan City will be under the charge of Emperor Dong's palace in the future." President, Minister Dongqing, I now apply to the Parliament of Zhongzhou State for Emperor Dong's palace to be in charge of everything in Tunan City. In addition, I apply to change the name of Tunan City. From now on, Tunan City will be the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. From now on, Tunan will be officially renamed Xianyuan City. It was earth-shattering. Xianyuan City. Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi were stunned at the same time. Chen Fangqing narrowed his eyes. Gu Xingyun's expression changed dramatically. In any case, he did not expect Li Tianlan to act so fast. Li Tianlan had just taken down Tunan, and Li Tianlan had already begun to think about the future. Xianyuan City? Gu Xingyun suddenly stood up. "I don't agree with this application. Tunan is Tunan of Zhongzhou State, not someone's private territory. Li Tianlan, what do you mean by making Tunan the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace? You are simply a wolf with wild ambitions." Buzz! A clear buzzing sound rang in the conference room. Li Tianlan raised his palm, his face expressionless. The dazzling sword intent gathered in Li Tianlan's hand in an instant. Under the bright light, Li Tianlan's hand seemed to have a belt of light shining with various colors in an instant. The sword intent was like running water, condensed into a substance, extremely soft. Li Tianlan held the sword intent as if holding a long whip. Without any hesitation, his palm shook, and the long whip directly lashed at Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun, whose face changed dramatically, raised his hand subconsciously. The long whip of sword intent lashed directly on his hand. His skin and flesh were torn, and blood was flying. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at him indifferently, saying calmly, "Say that again?" All the people present were stunned. He made a move. Li Tianlan really made a move. This seemed to be just the beginning. Li Tianlan had already stood up. The sharp sword energy constantly gathered toward the long whip in Li Tianlan's hand. "Tianlan, calm down." Dong Chengwudi's voice suddenly sounded. The incomparably sharp aura suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, wiped the blood off Gu Xingyun's hand and laughed. "Don't be so shameless," he whispered. "You are no match for me now, so be careful what you say, and don't humiliate yourself." He patted Gu Xingyun on the shoulder, pressed his body, and directly pressed him on the seat. Gu Xingyun's expression was stiff, and his eyes seemed to be spewing fire. Li Tianlan remained calm and whispered, "I can slap your hand this time, and I dare to slap your face next time. Your Highness, do you believe it?" Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun stared at Li Tianlan, and his eyes were extremely ferocious. Li Tianlan smiled and said lightly, "You'd better not talk next. This is a matter between Emperor Dong's palace and Zhongzhou state, understand?" He straightened up and said calmly, "The establishment of Xianyuan City is beneficial to Zhongzhou state. I guarantee in the name of my grandfather that Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace will fulfill their obligations and responsibilities. I can assure the Parliament of Zhongzhou State that with the establishment of Xianyuan City, the whole Tianan will belong to Zhongzhou State in 5 years at most." You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.